that in accordance with the open meeting law, I want to advise you that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over Lunenburg Public Access. The Finance Committee meetings will air on Channel 8, Saturdays and Sundays at 7 p.m., Tuesdays at 11 a.m., Wednesdays at 8 a.m. The broadcast of the meeting is also available on YouTube. So if you just go to youtube.com, type in public access, you can scroll through the various meetings that are out there, including the Finance Committee. I do have just one item for the public. I have a letter, it's actually addressed to the treasurer, from Monty Tech advising us of the assessment for fiscal 15, and it is $778,046, and that is the number that's included in the town manager's budget. We'll be hearing from Monty Tech at our meeting next week to hear more about that. Before we get started, anything from the public? Any comments from the public? And any public announcements from the committee?
I don't have an announcement, but I do have a comment and just a couple of remarks. One, or observations. One was, as we talked about last week with DPW and the notion of the sweeper and in anticipation of tonight's meeting, one of the suggestions that I didn't know if we could investigate further, given that there was some money to be spent in the budget, whether or not it would make sense to look at potentially outsourcing or putting money in the budget for outsourcing for the coming fiscal year, to try it out, because I know that there's a sense to want to try it out, knowing that it's going to be hard to come up with $184,000 any other way. But as almost like a compromise move to try to find funds to outsource for next year's budget, with an eye to seeing how that goes and seeing if it comes. Again, not knowing if the sweeper is going to work, because if the sweeper works and they don't need to do it, then that's that. But the other thing that I think we might want to do too after the capital plan discussion, and maybe not tonight, but take another look at our borrowing, given that what I hadn't picked up on until looking at the capital plan again was where the fire trucks are coming in what looks like rapid succession in terms of replacement at to the tune of $650,000 here, $850,000 there over the next 5 years. So given how that might play out in terms of borrowing for the engine that we're looking to replace this year, how realistic it is to assume that the numbers that we have been looking at setting are going to be. So anyway, I just wanted to make those notes or observations for a later discussion.
Okay, and we are hearing from the Capital Planning Committee tonight, so I think that would be the appropriate time to take that up, both the issue of the street sweeper and the timing of the various fire apparatus that we're looking at. I think the town manager said in a prior meeting that we would only fund one large vehicle at a time. In other words, we wouldn't try and take on a debt burden of a second truck until the first truck was paid for. But I will table the rest of that discussion until we hear from capital planning. Anything else? Okay. This evening we have the police department, the fire department, capital planning, land use and administration departments, and unclassified debt service. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chief Jim Marino to represent the police department.
First thing I'm going to ask for is a new podium and an extension cord. That's it. I'm all set.
Capital plan.
After hearing about the sweeper and the fire trucks and everything, I might as well just go home. anyways.
Jason's copy of that.
I know the last time we met, as you recall, I told you that, one of our biggest priorities is manpower. And I think last time we spoke about that, I told you last year I didn't even make it an issue because I was trying to change the staffing landscape, which I've had some success at doing. Also, I wanted to take a look at a more comprehensive look at our staffing needs and try to present you with some data that'll help you make a more informed decision, as we go forward as to what our needs are, more or less maybe support my requests for manpower. Given the fact that, we're coming out of a, kind of a recession and there are still a lot of restraints in terms of the budget. But anyways, we'll start this discussion by mentioning the new proposed high school / middle school. I think that was a really great idea. I think it's actually the most important building project that we'll undertake in a long time. And I give my full support to that. I mean, I've been a resident my whole life. Most important building in town are the school buildings, I think. I think that's what brings people to this town, and it's going to continue to bring people to this town. And I think, my opinion on that is money should be no object. That's what's going to increase the values of our homes. It's going to help our community to grow, and I think we need that growth. I know there's going to be a lot of changes in the future here, probably positive changes in terms of community development. I think that's a good thing, and I support that 100%. I know, too, that our roads are probably one of your priorities this year. And again, I support any projects having to do with the repair or reconstruction of our roadways. Again, that's an important thing. That, too, will help to make the town more palatable. People will be more willing to come to Lunenburg if we have good roads. And I can tell you the example I always use is whenever I come from New Hampshire into Massachusetts, I can close my eyes and tell you when I'm here, just by the conditions of the roads. And so I support that. But that being said too, one of the functions of the police department is to make sure that the town's in good shape. And one of the projects that I propose with the DPW director is to make some changes to Marshall Park. And the reason I did that, let me just tell you a story before I get into this slide. I mean, if you've been in any management, if you've have any management experience or whatever, or any background in management, you probably have heard about the broken windows theory. Theory by which a lot of police managers, conduct business on a daily basis. It's a theory that's been occasionally derided by some other social scientists or political scientists or whatever, and sometimes it's completely understood. But that theory, not only, I think it's a very profound thing that can be used in a lot of facets of management. But at any rate, there was a sociologist named Zimbardo who conducted an experiment back in 1969. He parked a car on the Cross Bronx Expressway with the hood up, and he parked another vehicle out in California and Palo Alto on the side of the road, again with the hood up. The car in the Bronx, or on the Cross Bronx Expressway, was completely destroyed quickly. The one in Palo Alto sat there for 2 weeks untouched. So what he did is he went out to California and he took a sledgehammer and broke a window and within minutes, the car was completely destroyed, actually overturned. And, you know, what the experiment was trying to prove is that, you know, when people, you know, even if it was different social status, it seemed to have nothing to do with it. It was, the common element was the sense of mutual regard and obligations of civility were lowered by the actions that seemed to signal that nobody cares. And, you know, when they saw that the window was broken, that signaled that, you know, that action, no, you know, that nobody cared about it, so people were going to destroy it. So essentially what I'm saying is I'm proposing some projects around town to try to keep some crime down. But, you know, again, too, being a longtime resident of the town, I think that we ought to make as many moves as we can, you know, at probably, with probably a small amount of money to make the town more pleasant for people who come here and people who live here. And the reason I'm proposing this Marshall Park project, which is on the capital plan, I understand, is because the residents of the street complain quite a bit that the traffic, or the parked cars along Chestnut Street, you know, impede the traffic. And I know from a public safety standpoint, oftentimes you probably couldn't get a fire truck through there. So, you know, it's a huge concern for us. In addition to that, as you can see, there's this arrow is pointing towards the bathroom that was built up there many years ago that is constantly vandalized, so it's not even in use anymore. And you really can't even probably see it through the trees because, you know, over the years, it's all become grown in. So it's the perfect opportunity for somebody to go in there and wreck the bathroom because it seems like nobody cares. And not only that, it's not even visible from the street, so there's a lot of anonymity there. You can just go up there and do whatever you want. Nobody's going to know. So what I propose to do is have all those trees taken down, or at least most of them, and build a parking lot up there. And maybe rebuild the bathroom. I understand it's got a tight tank. There might have to be some replacement of that or whatever. But at least when people come to use Marshall Park, it's particularly from out of town. They're not going to come into Lunenburg and say, well, there's no place to park, there's no way to go to the bathroom. Not really a pleasant experience. We want them to have a pleasant experience. I think that's an important thing. What I did is just as an illustration, and Tom Andrews just alluded to this, but I'm going to play it anyway. One day I was driving by there in my own vehicle, and I took this video, if I can get it to work, of this situation that I had alluded to with the parked cars. Now this all started almost down towards the funeral parlor, and I was heading towards Highland Street, and I'm not sure how visible that is, but this is off my iPhone, so. This car here is just up the street from the funeral home driveway. That's where it starts that day. And you'll see this woman actually get out of my way as I'm coming up there because it probably startled her because the road's actually narrower than it actually looks through the viewfinder here, but you get a better picture of that further down the road. But, you know, it just goes on forever. It goes on to the end of the road. And as I said, if there was an emergency, you'd be hard-pressed to get a fire truck through there. As it is, if a car's coming the other way, you have to either stop and find a place into somebody's driveway or, you know, in between maybe a parked car to get out of their way so they can get by. And it gets particularly narrow right here, as you see. It's even worse. Literally one car, you know, it's the width of one car. So, at any rate, I wanted you to see this. And I'll play it, but it goes all the way to the end of the street. I'd be a little annoyed if I lived there too, with all these cars parked in front of my house. And then there was complaints about some of the ball players getting out in the street and getting undressed and putting their uniforms on in the street. You know, we had that kind of thing too. So again, you know, a broken window, I want to fix it. That's part of why we do these things. And again, that's on the capital plan. I hope everybody supports that. This is Prospect Street in Whalum. I've also talked to the DPW director about this. I've talked to some other people. There's a representative from the water department who said he'd help with this project if it ever got off the ground. But when you drive along Prospect Street, the arrows are pointing on the left. The arrow is pointing actually towards the new development over there, Emerald Place. You can't really even see it through the trees. The other picture on the right, that's coming around the corner by the A-frame by Elm Street. You can't even really see the lake. Now, you know, for short money, you could clean that all up, you know, clear out a lot of those trees, clean it all up, be able to come around the corner, you know, see the lake. It's still a beautiful spot. Again, around the corner by the town beach, you'd be able to see clear across the lake, another beautiful spot. You know, it become attractive. My fear is that, you know, people coming to Lunenburg, they come through there, and what do they see? Just haphazard brush, a rusty old chain link fence, not very attractive. Does it have anything to do with crime? Well, who knows? You know, at some point it may, when the fence is completely rusted and starts falling down, and you know, people come along there, they're going to toss fishing poles in the water and so on and so forth. So just a proposal, and it's only because I live in town that I have an interest in it, and being the police chief, obviously, you know, I'm looking at areas in town where I think things could happen in the future. Anyways, I think I beat that up enough. Just a little information on how this budget was done. I bring this up because, you know, my style of management is to use everybody in the police department. I tell everybody, I don't run the place you do. I'm just the guy that tries to go out and get you things like money. Mike Luth, Linda's involved in the budget preparation. I've had some of the other officers, the patrolmen, involved in it. I get everybody's opinion on where we should go with it. I think it's a good practice, so I just wanted to bring that up. This is our table of organization. I think I'll talk a little bit more about this as I progress, but I at least wanted you to get a view of what I want this police department to look like in the next couple of years. With that, I just want to let everybody know that presently the police department employs 14 full-time officers. Right now we have 15 reserves, but that moves back and forth a little bit. I'd like to get a few more, put on a few more reserves. We're looking at hiring some female officers. I think, you know, we're going to need a few more female officers, and I have reasons for that that I'll get to later on in this presentation. But anyways, for the most part, it's around 15 intermittent police officers, public safety coordinator, and a public safety coordinator. The organization is comprised of 3 divisions: administrative operations and patrol. The subdivisions are criminal investigations, traffic control, and community outreach. I've included in the budget narrative, I imagine by now you've gotten a copy of my budget narrative, job descriptions for everybody, which I'm not going to get into. It's very lengthy, as you know, but you do have it in front of you. I think that, you know, it's a good illustration of exactly what we're responsible for, and I hope I didn't leave anything out. Let me talk about the budget, and you know, one of the budget's going to include some increases, and again, the most significant increase is fueled by my request for 3 additional police officers. The demand for service has increased this year, as it has for just about every year. The increased demand for service with inadequate staffing has a direct effect on our ability to decrease overtime, reduces officer-initiated activities, and it compromises our crime clearance rate. As I said last year in the budget narrative, police services in the community will never rise to an adequate level without a meaningful infusion of personnel. Understaffing tends to place increased demands on individual officers, leaving little time to bring cases to meaningful conclusions or simply to engage the community and solve problems. Community-oriented approaches to patrol, response, follow-up, organizational transparency, and proactive efforts are compromised because of restrictions in uncommitted officer time arising from budget cutbacks. What'll happen is the community will eventually see the police department as ineffective. The demand for police officers is increasing because the need for local police to address community policing, homeland security, and other emerging issues such as immigration enforcement, computer crimes, violence in schools, and implications of social media. The net result is that an increasing gap between the actual number of police officers and the amount of money allocated. I put up a slide here because it illustrates the types of calls for service that we respond to. These are just the types of calls that we respond to. I want to take a different approach to determining staffing needs, and there's different approaches. In the past, we've used that per capita approach. It's basically saying, okay, somebody out there, Homeland, the Department of Justice says that you should have so many officers per 1,000. The last calculation was 2.0 officers per 1,000. But what it doesn't do is, what it is there's no objective standards, for setting the minimal staffing levels just by somebody saying you need 2.0 officers per 1,000. It doesn't incorporate specific needs of the community and expectations and how officers spend their time, and it doesn't incorporate the quality of their efforts either. It just says you need 2. Why do we need 2 per 1,000? Just because, basically. Well, it's a really failed approach, I believe. There's the minimum staffing approach. That kind of requires us to do the same thing. Okay, I'm telling you, I need 3 guys on every shift. No objective standard for saying that. I just feel that that's what it should be, because I need my guys to go home at night. I don't want to be calling their parents saying, hey, I'm sorry, your son or your daughter was killed in the line of duty tonight, so I need 3 guys to make sure that happens. I need 3 guys to make sure that you're all safe. But I don't have anything to offer you to prove that. I'm just saying, because I'm a police administrator, because I have a ton of experience on the job, that's what I think you need. Great approach if everybody buys it, but I don't think it's the best approach. The authorized level approach, that's basically where the town says, okay, here's so much money, we're going to authorize that you hire this many men, and if we can't afford to do that next year, then you're going to have to lay somebody off, and I don't get that either. I thought looking at the workload would be the best way to approach that. So that's what I did, and I've spent literally a month and a half doing that. The workload approach addresses, with the workload approach, staffing indicators come from demand for service. Staffing needs are based on actual workload demand. Agency characteristics, features, and service style practices are taken into account. The workload approach estimates future staffing needs of the police department by modeling the level of activity. I say that with caution because officer safety, response times, and public safety and deterrence of crime are always a consideration, which can fall back to the authorized level approach. And what I mean by that is, say next year, I'm telling you, look, and I'm going to tell you this, that crime may not go up. As a matter of fact, this year we're down by 2%. However, a lot of different crimes went way up this year, but overall we're down by 2%, Well, next year, say crime plummets and we're just basing it on that, or we're basing it on calls for service, and for some reason, we didn't have that many calls for service next year, and you say, well, okay, we want you to cut a guy. So, you know, this is a great approach, and typically, things keep going up for reasons that I'll get into in a minute. So, I took this approach, workload approach. I'm going to try to show you that our staffing is remarkably inadequate through this approach. Let me just move on to the next slide. I think maybe this is just a continuation of the list I just showed. It's quite lengthy, and at any rate, this is a picture of our workload. This is the estimated consumed time by the patrol staff on calls for service and general assignments. Trust me, I was being generous when I did this. I was being generous in terms of, let's put it this way, these are very conservative figures. What I did is I looked at the number of patrolmen, and this is strictly the number of patrolmen. It's very difficult to try to figure out what, or to try to put on paper or try to document what the administrative staff does. That's a whole different ballgame. I'm looking at the patrol staff because they're the meat of the department. But I looked at call response, and I broke it down into call response. Dispatch to arrival at the scene with 51 shifts a week, 52 weeks a year, 11 people, 11 patrolmen. This is the figure I came out with. Dispatch to arrival, that means it takes time when you get a call to go from that point to whenever you get to the scene. I did arrival to clear the scene. Now that's just, you're at the scene, you're dealing with the problem, and then you leave. Well, what happens after you leave? Oftentimes, you're going to use up a whole lot of time following up on a call, and follow-up is one of the call reasons. However, it doesn't do everybody justice because oftentimes they don't put that in the CAD, in computer-aided dispatch. That isn't going to come into play as far as our statistics go, because they don't always call this stuff in. They'll go follow up a call. They could spend hours on it, and we may not even know it, but they spent hours on a call. So I'm being kind by giving these figures. Services rendered was a big one, you know. Everything's, a lot of stuff is marked services rendered. Now, what that means is they perform some service for the public, and we have to assign some kind of time to that, because they do take time to perform services for the public. Services rendered might have been on one of those call reasons that you just saw, and they have to follow up the call, they have to go deal with it, it takes time, and we estimate, and I think it's a low estimation, that we used up 1,134 hours in that time. We have to book prisoners, and all I did was take the bookings, and those are just bookings, and I multiplied it by 2, because by policy you have to have 2 guys in the booking room. Now, let me just point out another fact, and I'm cautious to say this on public TV. That's all we have sometimes, and most of the time is 2 guys. I'm not leaving 1 guy in the booking room alone with anybody, and particularly if we got 2 male officers with a female prisoner. And in fact, that happened this afternoon. It happens every day almost, until her boyfriend got arrested. But 2 guys in the booking room. So when that happens, nobody's on the road. You got nothing. And this happens, well, it happened 265, I think, or I can't read it, it's so small on my screen, but 265 times this year. That's being kind. 530 hours? I'm giving them an hour to book somebody. That is being very kind. But at any rate, arrest reports. Now they got to do an arrest report. 1.75 hours per arrest report, 265 arrest reports, 464 hours. Again, being kind. Those arrest reports sometimes take 2, 3, 4 hours. We had one the other night. It was an OUI arrest. The booking took forever because the guy kept vomiting, and you can't take the breathalyzer until a certain time after the last time you vomited. So this thing went on for like 4 hours. Then the officer had to do his booking, his arrest report. He was literally done for the whole night. So, and this isn't an unfamiliar thing. This happens quite frequently. So we looked at that. We looked at prisoner transports. You have to transport prisoners to the court every morning. Not every morning, but I mean, if somebody's under arrest and they don't get released, this happens so many times a year and I had to estimate that because I have no way of knowing how many people got released. But if 265 people were booked, I know at least 133 people had to go to court in the morning. Well, that eats up time. Lockup maintenance, that's just basically doing prisoner blankets, picking up the lockup, cleaning up the cell blocks, and so on and so forth.
Chief, excuse me for a minute.
Yeah.
With due respect, are you planning to take us through each one of these? We had budgeted 30 minutes.
Oh, you did? All right. I didn't know how much time I had. Well, all right. Let me just go to the bottom line then. If I can find it. At any rate, the total is 21,846 hours. If you do the math, at 51 shifts, that's 21,216 hours. We're running at a deficit as it is. That's what I'm trying to prove, that there's more work than there are people and hours that or more work than there are hours to do it. That's what it looks like. That's our call response, always the biggest part of it. Leaves no time for officer-initiated calls. That's what we're trying to, we're a small town. Community policing is a huge thing. And the correct definition of community policing, well, we're trying to create partnerships and so forth. It helps to deter crime. Calls for service go up. Arrests go up every year. Incidents go up every year. They don't go down. They've been going up for every year since all these projects have been built. They go up anyway. They're gonna. It's just it's the nature of the beast. This is what we're trying to accomplish. The increases are reflected by what I'm asking you for. I'm not going to get it. I was already told that. I saw the town manager's recommendation. I suggest that start thinking about putting extra police on over the next 3 years. Or else we're really going to have a problem. This was supposed to start back in 2008. Since then, there's been several building projects that went on. All it did is increase our calls for service. So basically what I showed you is we're behind the 8 ball already. So I know there's no money, but one a year, that over the last several years, and I know the economy's been bad, maybe we should have thought about putting one guy on a year. Now I'm asking for 3 this year. I know I'm not going to get it, but maybe in the next few years, we've got to start thinking about that. Training's another thing we're fighting right now, too. The training budget sometime is going to have to change because there's all kinds of mandates. And if, people probably aren't aware of that the statute mandates a ton of this training, but everything comes with a fee. I was trying to point out that it seems like not only do we have to pay overtime to send people, we have to pay overtime to cover people who are gone to classes. Now we have to pay fees for a lot of classes. I have to send a guy to a traffic crash reconstruction. Actually, I got to send 2, $950 a piece just for the fee. Then I got to pay him to go to it, and I got to pay somebody to cover their shift because, we have a manpower issue all the time. I only got 2 guys on a shift. So I guess that's, the biggest request I have, I guess, is probably the most important one. I threw this in here just to show you that I mean, we're not a money-making organization, nor do we pretend to be. And, but we do bring in fines to the town. This year, the total, well, last year, in 2013, it was $61,435. After the court action, that means when everybody gets either the not guilties or whatever, it was down, it turned out to be $47,365. Just in 6 months this year, after court and everything, this is net to the town, it's $33,185. So those things have increased. And then I have a couple initiatives, hopefully that'll help bring in some revenue, and we're gonna try to develop a municipal towing contract. We're gonna update the rules and regulations that have to do with motor vehicle fines. That'll help because those fines come directly to the town, because the state, right, when we write under the state fines, most of it goes to the state. This will all come to the town. We're looking at regional lockup, hope to reduce some of the costs there. And we're trying to train the trainers for reducing costs and training fees, but we're finding even if we do that, we still got to pay people to come to the station to get trained. So that's something I got to work on. I got to try to come up with some alternative there if we're going to try to save money. And then I'm looking at telephone reporting unit strategies used in conjunction with our community outreach program, where people can actually call in directly to him to make complaints. It doesn't take up some patrolman going to a call that he doesn't really necessarily have to go to. So, and I'm sorry to use up your time. I didn't realize I only had a half hour. But essentially that's it. You know, I'm committed to try to, committed to try to achieve the budgetary goals, but I'm so confronted by all kinds of challenges, daily. I can't predict every day what's going to happen. I could have 20 people locked up tonight. I can't predict that. So I'm committed to it. But there are challenges. I'm telling you, and I've said it before, this isn't the first time, it's not the second time either. I've been here, and even with the previous chief, to say that one of our biggest problems is we got to bring the staffing level up in the police department. I thank you for listening to me anyway. Lather on. Do you need this?
Questions for Chief Marino? Jim, I do have a question. I think you're on the right track with tracking incidents and tracking them over time, and that's a great perspective in terms of looking at the activity that goes on and the types of things that you guys need to do. I'm curious if the total hours against the reported incidents is higher than the calculated available officers or officer hours. How have you bridged that gap?
See, I skipped over that slide in the interest of moving on, and I'm sorry. I had a list there. I was going to show you what we do.
No,
we have to, basically what we have to do is, we have to make adjustments. We have to call people in on a regular basis. And in 6 months, I have a list a mile long. What I did is I started tracking that. And how I do that is when somebody comes in, we call them in because there's a major incident going on and I need help in the station right away. I got to call people in. I tell them, articulate why you're here. Linda's going to put it in the budget, and then I'm going to tell you why. And that's what I had, a list of that. I had a whole list. And that is out of control. And it's because we got 2 guys on. And in a major incident, I got to constantly call people in to cover so that the town's not left unprotected. And for a whole list of other reasons, I got to call people in that are all legitimate. And that's how I've been doing it. But that's what we do. We pay overtime to cover those.
So Jim, on page 12, that list here, this list here is people that have been,
Right, yes. That's just in the last, that's from July to December. That's 6
First
months.
6, okay.
Those are the reasons why. And you can see some of them are just because the guy or the officer made an arrest an hour before his shift ended. And he had to book the person, and then he's required to issue a police report because we can't go to court with the person the next day without it. So what am I gonna do? Send him home? No, he's gotta finish the report. So I gotta pay him overtime to be there. That's just the nature of the beast. So that's how we do it. And if I had the list in front of me, I could tell you a lot about some of the other reasons, but, you know, the graffiti incident, you know, that took quite a chunk out of my budget. But I think that's, I assume that's answers your question, though. I mean,
Yeah, precisely. Overtime, calling in extra staff, extra hours, if you will, beyond what the normal shift configuration would allow.
right.
Right.
And we have operational needs too. I had to call a guy in for a whole day because we had to do some construction in the evidence room. Well, can you imagine, let some contractor in our evidence room, what would happen down the road when some lawyer found out about that, if I didn't have an officer in there sitting, babysitting them?
Right.
You know, we got drugs in there, all kinds of stolen, you know, property and so on and so forth, rape kits and that, the other, all kinds of things in there. So, you know, that sounds like a funny reason, but we had no choice. We had to call somebody in on overtime to sit there. I had nobody else to do it. You know, and these are the challenges we have. Point that out. Anyways, if that answers the question, get out of your hair.
You did, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Jim, thank you very much. We do appreciate the challenge that you have, and it's, and we're not quite out of the woods yet. It's still difficult times for the budget, but we're doing the best we can here.
Yeah, just call me anytime. I think you all have my cell phone number by now. If there's any questions, I'd rather you just call and ask. Believe me, I'm an open book.
Right.
I think that's important, you know, we should communicate about these things. It's important. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have the Fire Department, and Chief Pat Sullivan is with us this evening.
Sergeant. I know the target request was a half an hour. I'll try to be as close to that as I can. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'll try to make this as brief as I can. I'll go through it. Some of you have seen before. Unfortunately, I hate to sound like a broken record, but a lot of our concerns have been the same for several years now. For the newer folks, I will touch on a few different things. Again, we are the fire department. We still go by the name fire department because it's tradition. We're really more of an all hazards response agency. Now, pretty much anything that Chief Marino's department doesn't handle that's an emergency, we handle. Whether it's fire, whether it's emergency medical, hazardous conditions, hazardous materials, technical rescue, assisting the public. The old joke in the fire service was all else fails, somebody calls the fire department. Usually if somebody doesn't know what to do or what to deal with something, we get the phone call on it. Who are we? What are we made up by? Fire department currently consists of 5 career staff and 45 paid on-call firefighters. For people who don't know what an on-call firefighter or EMT is, they're part-time people. They respond when there's a call, and they get paid by the hour when they come out. Other than that, they have other jobs, they have other things that they do. The challenge is, again, that they're part-time, not always around. Staffing, for us, we are staffed Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the station. Generally, it is with the 3 career firefighters. There's normally 2 to 3 on most of the time 3. That is supplemented by 24 hours of per diem staffing, using some of our call firefighters to fill the gaps when one of the career people is off on their day off. That's further supplemented by my administrative assistant, who is also an EMT paramedic and can fill in the ambulance when needed as well. And then by myself when I am able to be in the station. Again, 4 call officers, 31 call firefighters, 10 on-call EMTs. And you see most of the firefighters are dual-role firefighter EMTs. We operate 3 engines, 1 ladder truck, 2 brush trucks, 2 ambulances licensed at the intermediate level, or ALS intermediate level of care, and 4 utility and support vehicles. I know there were some questions about the vehicles, and I will touch on them at the end of the presentation. Call volume, obviously we don't have the numbers that the police department does. Last year we responded to 1,733 calls, broken down as such. Fires in hazardous conditions, they can be anything from building fires, car fires, brush fires. They can be stove fires, chimney fires. They can be fuel spills, motor vehicle accidents, explosions, overheated wires, anything along those ways. Alarms, that's generally false alarms. The hazardous conditions can also be carbon monoxide incidents as well. Service calls, cellar pumping, assisting the public, lockouts, things like that. They might necessarily maybe an emergency, but they're still something that the public needs help with. Big part of our work, EMS and rescue. 801 calls last year, approximately 75% of those resulted in transports to the hospital. Inspections are a big part of our job, 459, and then the other 61 are detailed, generally miscellaneous type things. 10-year span for our calls. Generally, after about 2005, 2006, we saw a large jump just before that. We've stayed relatively flat. I still keep waiting for the other shoe to drop with all the development that's going on in town, that one of these days we're going to see a jump like we saw in 2003, 2004, and the calls are going to pick up again. I think some of that has been, we've been blessed with not so much severe weather, which results in a lot of extra calls for us. We've gotten away for that for the most part in the last couple of years. I know it doesn't seem it with the snow, but I have a feeling sooner or later that's going to jump again. Other things that we do, fire prevention and safety education. We do a lot more than just deal with emergencies. Fire investigation, by law, we're required to investigate any fires that occur in town. We have a couple members that are trained fire investigators. They also work in conjunction with the State Fire Marshal's office. Code inspection and enforcement. We have one of our career people, Captain Reese, spends pretty much his whole day, if he's not responding to emergencies, out on fire code inspection and enforcement. The work he does is absolutely amazing. He pretty much goes from the beginning of his shift to the end of his shift, taking care of state mandated inspections like smoke detectors, oil burners, propane, new constructions, plan reviews. He also handles a lot of the public education and training. I'll talk about that a little bit further into this, but trying to get out to the schools, doing education there for children. That over time has made a significant impact not only here but across the state in decreasing fire deaths and injuries amongst children. And as I'll talk about later on, our focus now is on the opposite end of the spectrum and working on our senior citizens. We also, again, administration and support. We do a lot of training. I'll talk about that in a moment. We'd handle some of our own vehicle maintenance in-house. Some of it we have to farm out, the more technical stuff, but basic stuff we do with a couple of our call firefighters that can do some of the maintenance in-house. Saves us a little bit of money there. Obviously, data collection is a big part of the job nowadays with the electronic reporting. And then emergency management. Well, our emergency management department consists of basically one person, being me. Again, the fire department assists with a lot of that too. The main function of that is emergency preparedness and operating the shelter. Training, again, is a big part for us. And again, this is just so you sort of understand what we do and what's involved with it. Again, we train twice a week. We do pay our firefighters for those drills. They're usually 1 to 2 hours in length. The recruit training, any of our new firefighters have to go through this training at the Fire Academy. It's approximately 300 hours. They go 6 months, 2 nights a week, and every Saturday. And that's all in their own time. That's pretty much what's required just for a new firefighter to be basically competent to perform his duties. And we have to train on new equipment periodically as we upgrade things. Operator training, training drivers for the heavy apparatus. That's approximately 65 hours of training that we usually do in-house. We just don't want to hand somebody, put them in, again, a $500,000 or $600,000 piece of equipment with zero training and let them go. Some places have done that with bad results or predictable results. So we do quite a bit of training in-house, and again, the guys do that on their own time. First responder training for the non-EMTs, we have to do that every 3 years or so. EMT continuing ed, EMTs have to get 40 hours now. 40 hours every 2 years. That's changed quite a bit for us. It's becoming not a challenge, but it's definitely different with some changes at the state level. There's also several more requirements for some of our advanced level providers that's costing us a little bit more money too. And again, we have to train on hazardous materials periodically. Technical rescue, we have several people trained in different disciplines for that. Again, they do that all in their own time. Almost all of this training, except for the bi-weekly drills, is pretty much on their own time. And again, that's in between their own regular jobs, family life, everything else. I can't say enough good things about our call people and the commitment that they make to this. I wanted to touch quickly, just so people understand what we do for grant funding and what we get for grant funding. These are some of the different grants that we were eligible for every year. Between these and some grants that were shared with other departments, we gained approximately $67,000 in grant funding last year. A couple of my officers, Lieutenant Dillon, Captain Jones, Captain Reese, are quite amazing on working on some of these grants, and they're doing quite well for us. Just so you know what we've gotten, to see what's out there, we received almost $51,000 for emergency bailout equipment and training. That's just a photo of when we were doing the training at the station. Basically what it is it's part of the firefighters' turnout gear. It's a modified rappelling harness and a somewhat short rope that allows them, if they are cut off in a fire on an upper floor of a building, they can bail out a window. The cold hard fact is that if they're cut off and the fire conditions are deteriorating rapidly, they're going to come out that window one way or the other. This gives them a way with enough rope to escape from about 3 to 4 stories and be able to get onto the ground safely. Some states are actually starting to require this as part of the equipment. But we received a grant that paid for pretty much all of that equipment to fit out all of our firefighters and pay for the training to have someone come in and teach us how to do this. We were also able to gain 2 power lift cots for the ambulance. These are basically, instead of manually lifting the stretchers up and down, these are powered cots. We've been fortunate. We've had no back injuries or serious injuries doing that. Other places have. They found, especially larger services, they found quite a bit of savings just in injuries alone by going to the power cots. They run about $15,000 a piece. We were able to get them a substantial savings, fortunately, and the grant helped out with that as well. So hopefully it'll cut down on any potential injuries. We also have a grant pending through AFG to equip all our vehicles with automatic external defibrillators. Right now, we only have them on the ambulances and a couple of the engines. Some of them are getting out of date. We're hoping to replace all of those and have one, so anytime one of our vehicles is there, there's always a defibrillator handy. We had an incident back last summer, or late last summer, where one of the brush trucks was out on a call. A cardiac arrest occurred nearby. They responded and helped, but they had no AED on that truck because that isn't one that carries it. Whether it would have made a difference in the outcome, I don't know, but it certainly would have helped. EMPG, Emergency Management and Preparedness Grants. These are small grants we get through the state. $2,750 last year. We were able to buy some trauma gear to go on the ambulances, specifically to deal with gunshot wounds, explosion damage. This is stuff that came out of the marathon bombing that we looked at. We talked to some people that were involved in that, and it was some equipment we were able to get that, God forbid anything like that ever happens around or one of our trucks has to respond to, we have the proper equipment. There was also a grant through Homeland Security that the town received for $14,000. It was able to provide some equipment for police, fire, and for the shelter. They also provided a grant that provided us with combustible gas meters to look for carbon monoxide, gas leaks, things like that, that we were able to add to our fleet as well. Safe and Senior Safe, Student Awareness of Fire Education was a program we haven't been involved in for a few years. We got back into it. We were able to get just under $5,000. This, for the student education, provides some money for us to get materials to teach fire safety education to the children in the schools. It also provides for some money to send one of our people to be a certified educator for that process, which is something the state requires now. The second part of this is the Senior Safe, which is one of the things they found is that we've done a real good job with the children in town or across the state, but maybe not so much for the elderly. In the last 5 or 6 years, we've had 3 fatal fires in town. Almost all of them have involved elderly people. And we're trying to concentrate efforts for safety for their purposes. What this grant is doing primarily for us right now is allowing us to buy smoke and carbon monoxide detectors that people in need, seniors in need, we can go out, we can get them into these houses. So far in the work that we've done so far, we've been working with the senior center. Approximately half of the people that we've gone out to see, they've had no working smoke detectors for elderly. So it's definitely, it's making a difference. Okay, proposed budget. Again, I'll move this along. Primarily, these are the again, above target requests beyond the town administrator's budget. Like Chief Marino, I have staffing concerns. Most of you have heard those concerns many times now from both my predecessor and myself. The budget includes numbers for 24/7 per diem staffing, which would basically just give me 2 firefighter EMTs in the station on a part-time basis. We'd be paying the call firefighters their hourly rate to put 2 people in the station. And I'll talk about why that's so important in a little bit. It includes some increases in my overtime light item, and also the duty officer items. And it also provides for some increases in EMS supplies. Those are just some numbers. Again, the firefighter salary, that's a number to put 2 of my call people in the station 24/7 to allow that first vehicle to get out the door immediately, get on the road, cut down our response time, and that's the real important part. The other numbers are our overtime has been pretty much funded at the same thing. You can see the actual expenditures. We always run over that. I have to dig into the budget somewhere else. My overtime costs are a little bit different than the police department's. Probably 95 to 98% of that is all callback. My career staff, they're expected to come back on after-hours calls with the call firefighters. They're some of my officers. I need them to come back. I can't tell them to sit at home and listen to the call. I have to have them come along. The weekend on-call officer is, all my officers take turns being on call on the weekends to be available, to make sure there's an officer on a call, if there's any questions from the dispatch center. Some of what we call still alarms, calls that only need 1 or 2 guys to go. We don't have to put the tone out and send a whole bunch of people. Several years ago, or a couple years ago, that amount was increased for the career staff in their contract. I increased it for the call officers as well. I don't think they should be getting paid a different rate to do the same job as their career counterparts. Unfortunately, that has not been addressed in the budget. So instead of $6,500, I spend $13,500 every year. I'm asking to bring that back to just cover what my normal cost is to do that job. The career staffing, or not career staffing, or per diem staffing. Again, I've talked about this. Most of you have probably heard it more than once. This is to increase our response times. I think a lot of people have always been afraid that this is to replace the call people. It's not. I've got more call people than we've ever had right now. It's to decrease the response time, to get that first truck out the door. The only downside to a call department, and it's not a knock against the people, they're not at the station. We can't, our job is all about time, getting someone on scene as quickly as possible. We can't do that by driving 80 miles an hour. We can't make that time up. The only 2 places we can make that time up is either the time it takes for the dispatch center to give us the call, and the time it takes to get the wheels rolling from the time that call comes in. Those are the only two places we can gain any amount of time. So some of the terms we talk about is the dispatch time, the time from when 911 rings to the time the dispatcher pushes the button and puts the tone over the radio. The turnout time is the time from when that tone goes off to the first truck starts rolling out the door at the station. And then the response time is the time to actually get on the scene. Ideally, and these are national standards, they want to see that within a minute, the first truck on scene within 4 minutes, and the balance of anybody else assisting, other apparatus coming in, or an ALS unit to back up the ambulance, and within 8 minutes, approximately 90% of the time. That's just a quick diagram of how long it takes to go 4 minutes. Well, that's what we can get from the station in 4 minutes in town. Obviously, the only way you're going to get that is to have fire stations all over town. I have no illusion that's not going to happen. But it just means all that much more about how much we want to get that first vehicle on the road, get it moving. Again, dispatch time, the target time is 1 minute or less for them to process the time, and our time, what we want to see is a minute or less to get out the door. When I did stats for the last 4 months of 2013, we came up with approximately about 2 minutes in the daytime and 5 minutes and 31 seconds at night. That's about a minute different than last year, which I'm starting to look at. I think that's maybe something since we've changed over to the dispatch center, how they're processing the times. We're working on that with them now. Still, 3 minutes and 31 seconds doesn't seem like a big difference. This is, get caught up here. This is just a chart of the last 2 months of 2013, showing on a graph where our response times are. The blue dots are when the station was manned. The red squares are when the station was unstaffed. And this was fun because I had to do this by hand. I had a migraine by the time I was done doing it. Simple thing when you do those numbers, for the staff times, only 9% of them took them over 4 minutes to get out the door. And chances are those were probably investigations, service calls, something that wasn't an emergency. Unstaffed, 64% of them were over 4 minutes. As you can see, some of them are out there a ways. Not a big deal unless you're the one who happens to be waiting for that vehicle that particular day. And the challenge of that is being on call. Even with having the on-call EMTs, they may live in opposite corners of the town. They've got to come all the way in. We pay a couple of them to be on call, but to be available. We don't pay them to sit in the station. As you can see by some of the dots or the squares, some of them do. I have a lot of young people. They're very gung-ho about the job. They spend a lot of time at the station. So it offsets some of that sometimes. But sometimes I have people that live further out. We've talked about the hard call coverage. That's at night and weekends when the station's not manned. We pay 2 of the EMTs an on-call stipend to make sure that they are available. And we always know they're available to guarantee the ambulance will get on the road. And then they get their hourly rate when they go out. It's a semi-voluntary thing. We expect to have them do 3 to 4 shifts a month. It's on an average, but if we have people that don't make that after a while, we usually start taking action or eventually trim them out. We've become pretty strict on that. As you can see, we maintain an average of 89 to 90% shifts covered. So it works pretty well. Again, some of those people covering may be on the outskirts of town. Takes them a while to get back in and get the ambulance. Again, all about response time. Why do we harp on response time? Why do we want to get there so soon? Part of this is a chart that I stole from the American Heart Association. It's on cardiac arrest, chance for survival. The longer it takes somebody to get there to start CPR, to get a defibrillator there, for every minute that something isn't being done, that person's chance of surviving drops by about 7 to 10%. All the people I've ever seen that have survived, they had somebody start CPR right away and they got a defibrillator there really quick. That's why, again, on the EMS side, which is a big part of our job, we want to get somebody there as soon as we can. The other side is the fire side. And if you'll indulge me for a couple of minutes, some of you saw this video last year. Cross my fingers, this is going to work. It only takes a few minutes. This is basically modern furniture versus your grandmother's furniture. As you'll see, as soon as it works, I hope. It's gonna make a liar out of me. Well, what the intent was, it was going to show the difference. If people think they have time to escape a fire, basically what it shows is what the old style furniture, wood, cotton, wool, versus your modern furnishing, which are all basically some derivative of plastic. And that basically the entire room was on fire in a little under 4 minutes. The old style furniture, which everybody thinks of when they see fire on TV, it took about 30 minutes. But nowadays, the fires, they grow in size so quickly. That's why we want to get there in such a hurry. I beat that enough on a dead horse. I know it's not covered in the budget. I understand the funding issues. But again, someday this is going to become a challenge. And I'm just hoping I'm not standing here someday explaining why something bad happened because we couldn't get that truck there fast enough. Right now it's fortunate. Like I said, we have 45 on-call firefighters and EMTs. It's great. The difference with call people nowadays, years ago, most of your call people were people that lived and worked in town. They had other jobs, that's all they wanted to do. They wanted to be a part-time firefighter and they did something else. We still have those people, but most of them now, I've got young people in their late teens, early 20s. They all want to be firefighters somewhere. And what's happening with those people, or police officers, I've lost one to Chief Marino's department. They're moving on to public safety jobs somewhere else. And then I may lose them, I may not. That's my challenge. Other expense line items, the big one that is EMS supplies. That used to be $10,000 until several years ago. It was dropped to $6,000. I'm asking to be moved up to $12,000. We've already exhausted that line item. I'm digging into fire equipment and stuff now to keep the ambulance supported. That was dropped down. Again, like everything else with inflation, cost of our supplies keeps creeping up every year. And it's getting harder and harder to do that, especially with, with the money that we bring in off the ambulance and that. Most of the other ones are the same. The protective clothing, last year I'd asked for an increase. We were fortunate when we got the AFG grant for that protective equipment. We had also put in for the same thing off the capital plan because we had gone for 3 years in a row, hadn't got it. They both came through at the same time. We needed some of the money out of the capital line item, and then after working with capital planning and the town administrator, we were able to repurpose some of that money and buy 12 sets of turnout gear for our firefighters, the coats, the helmets, things like that. And that actually pushed us back over that I shouldn't need an increase on that for a while. Once upon a time, $10,000 bought us 5 sets of gear. We're down to about 3.5, probably down to 3 pretty soon. And with 40 some odd people on call, that gear only has a 10-year lifespan. All the standards are now saying that after 10 years, we have to throw it out and not use it. In fact, it's a point I try to send guys to the academy, even though the stuff's in good shape, if it's over 10 years old, they won't let them do it. So it's getting harder and harder to do that. And again, some stuff wears out faster than others. Some people get more use out of it. Radio maintenance, again, I hadn't changed that one, but radio maintenance for all the town's radios are in our budget. The capital plan has $30,000 for radio equipment in there, above and beyond this. That's to provide better coverage down in the Lake Shirley area. Again, this is a hilly town. It's 29 square miles. We have some poor coverage areas. We've been trying to work that in and fill that in. That will help not only our department, but the police department as well. And the water department has been a big help with that. It will go in one of their buildings on one of their towers, as is almost all of our radio equipment. And they have been excellent to work with. Apparatus. There were some questions on the apparatus replacement plan, the emergency vehicles. The last page of your handout has a 10-year cycle for the apparatus. But again, just a little bit about what they are. We have 3 engines or pumpers. Pumpers carry water. They have a pump to move the water. They have hose, hand tools, certain amount of ladders. Every one of them has a minimum amount of equipment that they're required to carry. Our trucks, each one is set up to do something a little bit different. Engine 4 carries more water. It has a little bit more of the attack hose that we would use. That truck's designed to get in first, starting attacking a fire. Engine 1 carries more of the supply hose. It usually finds a hydrant, pond, something, that will get water to engine 4. And that one is also equipped to deal with car fires, vehicle fires, things like that. Squad 3 is the third pumper, currently the newest one. That truck is a special hybrid vehicle. It also doubles as a heavy rescue unit. It carries the Jaws of Life. It carries heavy lift airbags to move vehicles. It carries cutting tools. It carries rope rescue and technical rescue equipment. And it does double duty as that. The ladder truck we purchased as a refurbished unit in 2005. Has a 110-foot aerial, allows us to reach the roofs on buildings. Construction on buildings isn't what it used to be. The roofs are much more dangerous to work. Most of you probably caught the headlines down in Westport, Mass. They had 2 guys fall off an icy roof. I don't know if they were working from an aerial ladder. I'm guessing that they weren't. But they had one guy that's in critical condition because he went 30 feet off a roof trying to work at a chimney fire. These are the things we were concerned about with getting the ladder. The ladder also carries over 200 feet of ground ladders for places we can't get the aerial into. It carries a lot of tools, equipment, salvage equipment. If we have a fire, despite popular belief, we don't like going in and destroying everything in sight. We do try to protect people's belongings. We carry stuff to cover up holes that we make, protect furniture, things like that. 2 forestry units, 1 small one, 1 large one, to deal with forest fires. The large truck, engine 5, was bought off a federal AFG grant back in 2003, 2002. It's a larger, heavier truck, it's 4-wheel drive. It carries a similar pump to the other pumpers, and it carries 500 gallons of water. It does not carry all the other stuff that the other trucks do, so it doesn't quite classify as a full-blown pumper, but it can act as our reserve pumper if we need to, if one of the other trucks is out of service for a long time. 2 ambulances, 1 primary and 1 reserve. Generally, the primary truck handles about 80 to 85% of the calls. That truck, usually we try to keep that one only 5 to 6 years old. As we rotate the vehicles, as we're waiting for the new one to come in. When a newer vehicle comes in, the second one, or the older one, becomes the backup vehicle. It responds to about 15 to 20% of the calls. And we usually try to keep that one out to 10 or 12 years old. The water rescue unit is actually one of the old ambulances that we kept instead of trading in for peanuts. We refurbed it in the department ourselves, set it up to tow a trailer. We set it up to carry all our ice rescue gear and scuba gear for members of the regional dive team. And that truck, it worked out well utilizing the old ambulance. It goes out a fraction of the time, sees a fraction of the wear and tear that it did as an ambulance, and it's worked out pretty well. And then there's 3 support vehicles, the command vehicle, the inspectional car, and the service truck, which is basically a 1-ton pickup truck with a snow plow. We do our own snow plowing in the lot. We also use it if we need to get into places during a snowstorm. Can help the ambulance crew get up in there. We can bring hose back from scenes, carry equipment we can tow. We have several trailers that we carry specialized equipment in, can tow those for us. Replacement plan. This is on the back page of your handouts just to give you some information. There's a couple things that have moved around on there, probably from the plan that was originally submitted back in the fall. So I reassessed some things, I moved them around. It does not reflect what the town administrator discussed. We've had some energetic conversations over that. My concern, to give you some history on this, the reason 2 of the vehicles are very close together is going back to 1990. We had a pumper that was bought in 1977. As you'll see, we plan to try to get 20 or a little bit more than 20 years out of a truck. We had an engine that it was a 77, and it fell apart. The water tank rotted out, the compartments rotted out, the truck fell apart. We had to get rid of it when it was 14 years old. And that is basically almost an emergency replacement, as I recall. I was still pretty new then. But it put 2 of the trucks fairly close together. And we've been dealing with that ever since. And I understand the concerns about having them so close together, but I'm also concerned that it would push out one of the engines to probably 25 to 27 years old, as the way it's discussed, and it'll push the ladder truck over almost 37, 38 years old. Keep in mind you can get antique plates at 25. I'd be a little scared of having equipment that's running with most of the guys that are on it much younger than them. These are the general planned replacement cycles. These are based off nationally recommended best practices for fire apparatus, which is usually 20 years for a pumper, 25 for an aerial, based on average use, wear and tear, changes in safety standards, changes in equipment. The aerials, they're generally a heavier construction because of the stresses put on them by the aerial, so they're usually a little more durable. They don't run quite as much as the pumpers, so they're usually not quite as much wear and tear. I put 30 years on for the forestry. In 1 year, a few years ago, we replaced the body on the small brush truck, engine 2. I put a placeholder on there to replace the chassis when that truck is 30 years old. When we hit that point, we may not need it. I just don't think it's good practice to wait until the truck breaks and then tell you I need an emergency replacement for a 1-ton or a 450 type chassis. And honestly, I'd rather have an old truck in the woods for what that does, but at some point, you gotta be prepared that it's gonna give up the ghost. The ambulances, like I said, we go on about a 10 to 12 year cycle. Part of trying to stretch that out is the new truck that will be coming in is a heavier chassis, and I'm hoping that instead of a 5 and 10 year cycle, eventually we can work into about a 12 year cycle on the vehicles. And then the support vehicles, again, we usually plan on 10 years. Our vehicles still see a fair amount of wear and tear, but nothing like a police cruiser would. Generally, the two support the cars average 8,000 to 10,000 miles a year in their duties, and that the pickup a little bit less. But we generally plan on 10 years, and some of that's based on, we're going to look at them to see what condition they're in as they go along. Budget as funded, again, just some of the increased concerns or risks. Again, the continued longer response times. Again, we're rolling the dice that there's that much longer that we're going to take to get there, greater risk for property damage or a bad outcome on an ambulance. Unfortunately, it is what it is. Call people do the best they can, but sometimes you're going to have the longer times. Putting 2 guys around the clock in that station would cut that down. I had missed mentioning it earlier. We used to be able to have money to cover with a couple per diem guys on the weekends. As the budget has stayed the same, expenses have gone up. I can't cover with a couple of people on holiday weekends when a lot of my call people are gone, on vacation, out of town. The days of people just hanging out and staying in town like they did in the 60s and 70s are gone. People go everywhere. So again, that's a bit of a concern. And again, the ambulance and emergency supply reserves continue to get shorter and shorter. We're finding ourselves more and more behind the 8 ball as our costs continue to increase. Some potential savings or revenue. We are looking at a potential group purchase program for EMS equipment. That's in its infancy. Not sure where we're going to go or what we're going to get out of that yet. Ask me again in another year's time how that's working out. The ambulance receipts, you've probably heard some talk about that. We have not increased our rates since 2009. I am working on some numbers to bring to the Board of Selectmen since they're the ones who set the rates. But just bringing our rates up in line with the other communities around us that are similar in size, we're probably looking at least a $75,000 increase in receipts. And again, I look at this as, I'm not looking to turn a profit. This is an emergency service. We're trying to provide a service to the taxpayers. I just want to offset the cost of doing that. Just to give you an idea, right now, one of our EMTs, their son was transported for difficulty breathing, had an asthma attack, in a nearby community that's served by a private ambulance that has to make a profit to survive. That cost approximately $4,000 for that ambulance ride. Looking at our rates, same mileage, what we'd be doing, same exact care, right now we're charging $1,265, just to give you an idea. And the numbers that I'm looking at don't increase anywhere near to that level, nor would I want to. But I think we can, with a reasonable increase in our rates, we can cover a lot of our expenses that we see providing our services. Again, priorities, if more money was available, increase our salary and EMS expense lines to cover the actual costs of providing our services. And then again, obviously, eventually getting staffing to having 2 firefighter EMTs in the station 24/7, at least on a part-time per diem basis. I think I was close to a half an hour.
Not bad.
I tried.
Not
I
bad.
tried.
Nice job.
Tried to stay on target. Any questions?
No.
Okay.
I guess not. Great. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right, Chief. Thank you. Is it gonna be somewhere where I can get it? I don't wanna do it with Jim in the morning. Jim won't be happy.
Next up, we have capital planning.
I'll leave it for now and
Director
we'll figure it
Benson is still on medical leave. So I think, well, Jamie Toll is with us this evening. He's part of the committee, and our own Steve Roboyne is also on that committee. I believe Steve is going to deliver the capital presentation. And we did get the capital plan at a previous meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I'm passing around right now is the actual document that the Capital Planning Committee delivered to the town manager at the conclusion of our sessions. I do have a couple, it varies somewhat from the manager's recommended budget, not dramatically, but somewhat, and I do have a copy of that for anyone else that's here tonight that would like to compare the two. The objective of the committee is to prioritize this year the 23 capital requests that came to us. We try to look at it from a lot of different perspectives. I will tell you that categorically, public safety tends to be the number one criteria that we look at, and if you look at the list of both the capital budget as recommended by the town manager and our budget, the number one recommended expenditure was an asbestos removal project for the schools. I believe this was for the middle school in the sum of $138,000. The second was a fire engine replacement, and I'm going to use a couple terms. There's one is high ticket item, and then there's another which is very high ticket item. And clearly, you know, this engine would be in the very high ticket item category. An example, last year we were able to include in a single year cash payout, a $200,000 ambulance. So I tend to describe those as high ticket, where when you're talking $500,000 or more, that's very high ticket, and that tends to start to spawn some financing discussions, which we did this year. Radio infrastructure for the police department, and if you'll notice, the way these are set up, they're in priority 1, 2, and 3. The other number one priorities were radio infrastructure, marked police vehicle, public safety building needed some epoxy floors, some weapons for the police department, the school department, upgrade the control system for the temperature control systems that monitor the temperatures throughout the different schools. Technology for both the town and the schools. And then senior center carpeting and tile, which in this instance, the carpeting was actually causing some safety issues. There were people that were actually tripping on some torn areas of carpet. So those were the items that we prioritized in the first category. And I think that all of those clearly are in the recommended budget from the town manager. The one decision that's been made, and we were supportive of it, was the financing of that very high ticket item, the fire engine, and I believe we were talking about financing that over a 4-year period. So what you'll see on our report is a $550,000 item, yet in the recommended budget, there's $125,000, which would be this year's installment of the payment of that fire engine. Okay. Any questions on that first group of prioritization from either the group or the public? Then I would move on then to the second area of prioritization. Senior center sprinkler system. There is a somewhat of a variation, a little bit of a variation, but not much. This is a small repair that was needed, but it could cause flooding and water damage to the senior center should they lose power. An asphalt roller, which was requested by the DPW. The Marshall Park parking lot, which was also discussed tonight by Chief Marino. I can tell you that someone that's also lived in this town for a long time, that street has been an issue. I know it's something that you could question, but I clearly think that there is a need, especially when you saw all those cars parked for what, maybe a half a mile in length, that we felt it was warranted. It wasn't in our ones, but it was in our twos, and we support that decision. It is in the budget, I believe. Senior Center HVAC repairs, just basic maintenance. We need to maintain our buildings. Technology for the town and technology for the school. That was the second piece. What we did is we broke it up into two buckets. One bucket depending on how much in funding was available. One bucket that was basically going to be able to be done as a priority 1, and then the additional funds in priority 2. Once again, I think a lot of these are, for the most part, small items to medium-sized items, just general ongoing capital requirements for the town. And once again, all of these were also included, to the best of my knowledge, in the town manager's recommended budget. Any questions on the priority 2 group?
Steve, just to clarify, I think the senior center sprinkler was moved to priority 3 in the town manager's recommendation, and the fire department car 2, which is the first item in priority 3, was moved up to
Yes.
priority 2,
Yep.
right?
Both were also, though, included in her recommended budget as well, I believe. Correct? Yes.
Oh, so the
If you notice down below,
the recommendation is to fund all the 1, 2, and 3 items?
the 3 items that were recommended in that priority 3 to be funded were the senior center sprinkler, the library carpet, and the Ritter HVAC.
Got it.
So, and once again, I think these were all, recommended in that priority 2 bucket, and they were all approved in the recommended budget by the town manager.
Right.
The third bucket, the first item on that was the fire department car 2. We did put that in the third category. We felt like it's an 11-year-old car. It's used primarily for inspections and things like that. It clearly didn't fall into a public safety type scenario. No one is claiming that it categorically shouldn't be done, but we felt that it was clearly, in our mind, it was clearly a category 3 capital plan request. DPW, the street sweeper, probably over the last 2 years, this has been the most oft-discussed item in the budget. There's never, that I am aware of in 2 years, there's never been a debate that the function needs to be done. I think everyone universally agrees that it does need to be done. The question is, what is the most cost-effective manner in getting that job done? And what alerts the group, and one of the major reasons why this is in the third category, it's a function that you can give it a 6 to 10 week per year function. We've talked over the last 2 years about regionalization really not being an alternative because most other towns need that sweeper at the same period of time. Regionalization is not an option. One potential option is outsourcing it. And quite frankly, in the previous year, we didn't feel we had the data that we needed in order to make a business decision on that. We had one person offering an extremely low-ball assessment of that cost, unrealistic, and we felt like we were probably hearing a little bit of a high-ball cost at the same time. So last year, this was on the list. It went to the third column. It was not funded. This year, it was brought in again. We looked at it fresh, and we basically came back with the same conclusion. We feel it's a necessary item, a necessary function. We would like to know categorically and exactly, no conjecture, no anecdotal talk about what it costs, what it doesn't cost. What does it cost? Had we had that information this year, we could have made a business decision to either buy or not buy and outsource the sweeping function. We've never had that. We always hear numbers. We never have seen a specific quote. This would be the annual cost. We met with the town manager at the conclusion of this year's meetings. We discussed it, and we pretty much agreed that what we need is that comprehensive analysis. It needs to be objective. It needs to be put out in a bid-type format, maybe for a 2 or 3 year function. And then we can make a good business decision as to whether we should be continuing to do that in-house and buy the sweeper, or whether we should outsource it. We just did not feel like we had enough information to be able to make a recommendation beyond the third category for this device. Well, I know there'll be a little discussion, but we'll go into the whole category in a minute. Library carpet, once again, we had it in the third because there was questions not only about replacement of the carpet, but all the movement of furniture that needed to take place. There was nothing in the budget for that. We felt like the information was a little bit incomplete. We moved it to that, not saying that it's something that would be a good thing to do, but in our view, it was clearly a Category 3. Town hall painting, with everything that's going on, we kind of put this in almost as a placeholder. Last year, there was money in the capital plan to do the roof and to do some chimney work and some things up on the roof. This year, we felt like putting some additional funds, at least in almost as a placeholder, was something that was realistic and something that was good to do. Once again, third category, and we totally understand the reluctance to do this with everything that's potentially happening with this building. The shade structure, while we just felt it was a very expensive solution to a very specialized problem, I think it's something we could look at further on down the road. It's not something that we're saying isn't important, but from a prioritization standpoint, we put it in the third category. And then I would say it's very similar with the police department, the speed side with the recording devices. No one's saying that it isn't something that wouldn't be good to have. However, we felt that it was clearly in the third category as well. Any questions regarding the third category?
The only question I would have, Steve, is if we're not able to fund certain items and they're in the third category, would they automatically carry over to the next year? And where would you see, from a longer-term perspective, where would you see those items falling? Do they ultimately rise to priority 1?
Sometimes they disappear, quite frankly. Other times, because either the manager of that department may not be as impassioned about it or may see other things that they feel are more important, so they tend to drop them off. But other times they will be reoccurring. And I would say, clearly over time, there might be a natural tendency to move it up the prioritization chain, but not necessarily. If when it's all said and done, I think we have to go into it every year with a clean slate and look at everything that's presented to us, and it's our job to prioritize from there. So it's possible that it could be reintroduced. It's possible that because it's been there before, we might weigh it a little bit higher,
right,
but not necessarily.
I guess just to further that, as the Capital Planning Committee considers the 5-year plan, is there a discussion of the lower priority items and how they might fall in a subsequent year?
There is, from a couple perspectives. One is we try to have at least a high-ticket item each year. You can't go a year without having, whether it's an ambulance last year. This year, clearly, it was the fire engine, and we're doing a chunk of that this year, along with a whole lot of other projects. And if you notice, the town manager's recommendation is well beyond what the historical $500,000 line is. So she is adding some things that the budget will bear, and they're all things, everything that she has put in for recommendation are things that we would understand and support. I would say this, though, the very high-ticket items, I think we've grappled with that amongst our group. We've talked with the town manager at both capital planning and the finance committee about the occasional need to finance a very high-ticket capital item. Otherwise, you could go a year without having any other capital improvements for the town. Any questions from the public? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks to the other members of the Capital Planning Committee. Next up, we have a number of miscellaneous accounts: land use and administration, unclassified, and debt service. And I believe Kerry is going to represent those items.
I think what I'd like to do first is stick with debt service to kind of, since we just went through the capital, to talk about what we can expect for debt service, and maybe it will help you with, I've never had a microphone too short for me. That's, you know, as you're thinking about, in particular, when we're going to fund the fire trucks in the future. So I gave you a couple of handouts, and I have 2 slides that you don't have copies of. So this first slide that I'm showing is our debt service budget for fiscal 2015. And the green on the bottom is our existing debt service. This is what we've already borrowed and are paying, what it looks like as of 2015. I went back to 2013 just so you could get a little perspective. Then the purple above that is the capital budget. So if we include a model that says that we're going to fund $500,000 in capital every year, what does that look like on our existing debt service schedule? The turquoise color above that is the capital that we will finance if the capital plan is approved according to the way it's presented, which means the fire truck. And the fire truck in here is proposed to be financed over 5 years. What I mentioned in the first budget presentation was that there was some additional money still left on the table, and one of the things you could look at was financing in 4 instead of 5. I'm not sure, based on how everything is sorting out, that it makes sense to do that. So this is in here at 5 years. And then the orange on top is the Lane property acquisition, which we haven't talked about in great detail, but I've just plugged that in, and we can talk about that further. But then this next slide that looks kind of funny. You know, we've talked about, we have this, and I'm calling it excess capacity. So as we pay off debt service, we have a capacity built in our operating budget to pay debt service. And if we just assumed that we're comfortable with what we're paying in 2015, what we're allocating towards capital, either in cash or in debt service, and we want to continue that because we recognize that we have lots of capital needs. We need to purchase fire trucks and ambulances and cruisers, maintain our buildings, and work on roads. We start to have a whole lot of excess capacity available. And I think if you look at the one spreadsheet that I handed out that says summary of debt service, so if you look at fiscal 2013, I apologize I didn't put a total, but in 2013 we spent $603,000 in debt and $603,000 in capital, in a cash outlay. So that's $1,206,000. In fiscal 14, we spent about that same amount. In fiscal 14, we used a significant amount of free cash to boost up our capital spending. But in fiscal 15, the way that the budget is proposed, we will spend about $544,000 in debt service, which is existing. And then in capital, I've broken this out into 2 parts. The cash portion of the capital is $565,000, and then $123,000 for the fire truck. So if you add those 2 together, you'll get to the total that was on the capital spreadsheet. And then again, I've thrown in the Lane property. But if we chose to implement this budget, we'd be spending $1,285,000 in capital. expenses. And if you just assumed that, or say we're going to, that's the level that we're going to spend for capital, just going forward. We've built that into our budget now. We're going to continue that. So what I've done in the succeeding years is identified then if we spend at that level, what's our excess capacity for spending for capital, for roads, for additional borrowing, for fire trucks. So you can see in fiscal 2016, we have $89,000, so not a whole lot more. But then in 17, we have almost $200,000, and then in 18, almost $350,000, and you can see how that builds. So even though we're concerned with how are we going to fund these fire trucks and how are we going to fund roads, you can see if we decide today that we're going to spend about $1.285 million in capital, because it's already built into our budget, that we start having money available for these other capital purchases.
Without really spiraling debt increases. It's maintaining it sort of at the status quo, correct?
We'd be spending the same level. We might be spending a little more or a little less in cash or debt service, but maintaining that same budget.
And we would have to make decisions about how much of that excess capacity to spend in capital in any given year versus how much to take on additional regular debt.
Right. So what I've shown here is just an assumption that we'd spend $500,000 in cash. And then, that excess capacity, in theory, is cash. But cash you could use for debt service or just a cash payment of projects. But this is a fairly high level of spending, but it's not significantly different than what we spent in the last couple of years.
I like it. It's sort of a built-in discipline, too. By doing it this way, things aren't ramping up or spiraling up. You're keeping it contained pretty much at the present level. It's a good method of sort of just disciplining what we spend on capital.
Are you anticipating that the pavement plan is part of this?
Yes.
And as we talked about last time, I know Brian and Steve, you weren't here, but we talked a little bit about the discussion we had about borrowing and putting a cap on the net regular debt. And we've suggested that that cap would either be 3% of the budget or 4% of the levy, whichever is less. And if you took the excess capacity and added it to the adjusted regular debt, interesting enough, we would still be below those caps that we set. Or at least it appears that way without seeing that number on this chart. 4% of the levy in fiscal 14 was $805,000. And I don't think we get to $805,000 in any of the future years if we add the adjusted regular debt and the excess capacity together. So we'd still be below that cap. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Which gives us the flexibility to use as much of that excess capacity toward debt as we so choose. Might be an advantage in some years to spend it directly on capital, and in other years toward taking on a modest amount of regular debt.
Yeah. So I think the one thing I want to caution for people who are really keyed in on the roads, our model shows the ideal expenditure on an annual basis is $800,000 to maintain roads in a good condition. Under this model, there's never going to be a year that we're spending $800,000. I mean, because at most, in fiscal 2024 going out, we've got about 750. I mean, assuming you're not going to dedicate any of that $500,000 in capital to the roads, because we certainly have at least that in annual needs. So this isn't going to fix everything. But I think it's a good start.
To start,
Yeah.
right.
And this assumes that, our revenue is going to be fairly stable. If we have any significant increase in growth in the community or anything like that, obviously, you could relook at this.
So, one major implication of this is we're not trying to increase the tax burden upon anybody. In fact, it maintains the tax burden. It doesn't increase it at all. The second is it puts some somewhat of a limit because we have those policies in place. And third, it says we have some capacity to continue to do capital planning as we have in the past. So I think this is a good plan. Knowing that we can't control what any future town meeting or group of people will do.
Right. Yeah.
Nor can we predict what might come before us in future years. I mean, we do our best to look out 5 years for capital, but stuff happens.
Mm-hmm. So then really the only other thing that I wanted to talk about in land use and administration, and I don't have all of the data that I hope to provide you, is the notion of a land use director position, which is included in the budget for fiscal 2015. And the chair of the planning board is here this evening, and I believe she is interested in making some comments as well. The selectmen and the planning board are meeting next week, and we'll talk about this issue further. I'm in the process of putting some data together. But as I presented in the budget, I feel very strongly that we're at a point in time where it would be of great benefit to the town to change up our land use department. And I have proposed this director of land use, calling it that just for lack of a better title. I don't want anybody to get too focused on the title, but more what I would envision this person doing. This person would serve as the town planner, as we've always had a town planner, planning director. But in addition to that, would also serve as supervisor, coordinator over all of the other land use departments to help coordinate the activities. And I think that's important, and I think the best example I can provide is we have a subdivision that's proposed in town, the O'Brien subdivision, that has been very controversial. The Planning Board and Conservation Commission in particular have been very involved in this. The Board of Selectmen have been involved in this from the perspective that we've been in court for, I don't know, several years, 3 or 4 years now on this particular development. And we get to the point over the summer where, and this developer, I think his the way he operates is to try to pit different boards against each other and going to one and not necessarily telling the others what he's doing. And it got to the point over the summer where I was concerned that potentially we had the planning board doing something and the Conservation Commission doing something, and maybe not necessarily understanding the implications of everything. And the reason, and I didn't come to this conclusion, town council called me and said, this is something that you need to be, you need to get everybody together. So that's just one example, and that's kind of on the one end of the spectrum. But I think just on a day-to-day basis, it would be helpful to have somebody who can coordinate those activities. All of the departments work great together, but everybody's on the same level. So we need a coordinator. The third thing that I can envision with this position is to have this person also serve as an economic development director. And this may seem like it's a tall task to be the town planner, to supervise and to be an economic development director. But we have some opportunities in this town over the next several years, and hopefully longer than that, for economic development. And the thing that comes to mind most readily is the Summer Street corridor. And hopefully, we've been working on the redesign of the roadway for probably 3 or 4 years. And hopefully within the next several years, that roadway is going to be redeveloped. And when that is redeveloped, and that's a nice roadway with good pedestrian access and very visually appealing, that's going to be of great interest to the commercial businesses. And we have, I believe, about a 40% vacancy rate there right now in the commercial properties. We need to put together a plan on how we're going to attract businesses and work with those property owners to bring some business in there, because that's one way to stimulate our local receipts, our property tax, building permit receipts, meals tax receipts, if any of them happen to be restaurants. So I think we're at a point where we need somebody to devote some time to economic development. Now, I have included in the budget a salary of $72,500, which I think is a good salary. I don't think it's a great salary, and I don't know that it would attract the most qualified individuals. I made the bold statement, which has been repeated to me, I don't know how many times since, that every dollar you invest in that salary is a dollar less that you'll spend in legal expenses, and I still mean it. And I will give you the data. I'm still working on the data, looking at the last 3 years of legal bills. And I say that because town council has said that to me. We use town council for a lot of professional services that aren't necessarily legal. And if you look at what other communities in this area or communities of our size spend on legal, we far exceed what any other community spends. Now we've had a lot of developments under review, so it might not be fair to compare us to some other communities, but the town historically has spent a lot of money in legal. We spend on an annual basis between $20,000 and $30,000 in general legal services. So the way we are billed for legal services, anytime we have a court case, that comes out separate. Anytime we have a matter it's not necessarily a court case, but it's becoming a regular matter. For instance, the work that we did on negotiating agreements on the solar projects, that ended up being broken out as a separate line. But then we have general legal services. And general legal services, sometimes we might have something before it becomes a court case might end up in general legal services. But $20,000 to $30,000 annually for the last 4 years in general legal services. And 40 to 50% of that easily is land use activity, and probably higher. And this is why I'm comfortable saying every dollar you put into that salary is a dollar less we're going to spend in legal, because a lot of those services we are relying on counsel to help us prepare bylaws, maybe to review existing bylaws, which we don't necessarily need an attorney to do that. Certainly, if the end product needs to be reviewed, but we don't necessarily need town council to help us so extensively in putting something together. And I will put together some more details so you don't have to just take my word for it. I'll show you what we have expended, and obviously I have to make some assumptions because I can't remember every single situation. Town council details what the conversations are, what the charges are, but I'll have to make some assumptions on whether or not that's something that could be handled by staff. But town council is fairly adamant that we use them a lot more than a lot of their other clients, and for a lot of things that we could do in-house if we had the staff to do that. And that's what I'm asking for in the budget.
Would you anticipate that this person could also play a role in the building reuse recommendations in the conversion of some of those buildings potentially over to businesses in the town or to other uses?
I think the right person could play a significant role in that.
That would be valuable, I think.
You know, another thing we've talked about just this week at the Selectmen's meeting was we had a request from a resident for more access to public transportation. So this person could be involved in, public transportation issues, because that's something that certainly, if we had more public transportation, we may have more people come into town for, certain businesses. Or Lunenburg might be a more attractive place to live if public transportation is stronger in this community. So, would you?
Well, you kind of took all my talking points, but I can still get up and always talk. Good evening, Joanna Bellato, Simeone Vice Chair of the Lunenburg Planning Board. I first want to thank you guys. You do a great job. The capital plan, that's the quickest it went. Very effective. Thank you. You do a great job. I know it's based on Kerry and the data she gives you, but thank you. It was very sad when Marion made the decision that is out on disability and going to continue not come back to the town. And Kerry and I talked about, we could do business the same and hire someone in, or we can look at what's really going on. And if you go to the MMA, all these communities are hiring grant writers, they're hiring individual economic developers, they have planners. The town of Concord is where I kind of heard firstly of the Director of Land Use, and I went and copied the job description and gave that to Kerry, because I really think it will be beneficial, and I've been trying to help Marjorie as best I can in the planning board, and I see that every 2 or 3 days we're sending an email, a request to Mr. Bard, and we maybe shouldn't be, and it should be going to the MRPC where they're really planning, and it's just knowing those right things. And I think if you put everybody together, and I can give story over story of where I kind of look silly or I gave wrong information, but I only gave the information that was given to me. And just this week with the gravel permit, I was told, no, they need a gravel permit, tell the developer you need a gravel permit. And then I come to a meeting and the developer went to the zoning officer with one of our town general bylaws that said, no, I don't need a permit. So now on TV I'm saying, well, okay, now he doesn't need a permit, but we really want him to have a permit because of the conservation and all the gravel he's removing, the impact. So now it's, well, can we put that on directives and bindings to the developer? So, okay, let's call Attorney Bard and ask him, whereas if we had a truly qualified person to do that, we'd be able to have that information at hand. And I think it's critical for conservation, for planning, the building officer, that every week they have a team meeting, a town meeting, that says this is what's going on with the developments, this is where Elmwood Road's at, this is where O'Brien's at. So they're all talking together, and none of those steps are getting missed. Because there's nothing more frustrating, especially for a developer, when they come in and they're at the point to build there and they're missing something, and now they're stopping for a week or 2 weeks because we didn't know that 3 other departments needed this piece of paper that they didn't provide. So I think it'll be a great asset, and as Kerry said, it will financially balance itself based on the cost of legal. And it'll bring the team of land use together, and I think it'll educate them all more and make them a stronger unit. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I could just make one more comment. The comments that I've made and what I've proposed are in no way meant to be critical of anything that we've done in the past. I think everybody has done everything that they can. We have an opportunity, and I think we need to take advantage of the opportunity to be the best that we can be. Obviously it is hard coming and talking about how to do something better, but I think that's the point of why we're here. We're looking to be the best that we can be with the money, the resources that we have available.
Just a comment, I would agree. We're taking advantage of an opportunity, but it's an opportunity to look more broadly at what's in the best interest of the town. And that's always a good thing to do.
Thank you. Dave Matthews, Board of Selectmen. Just want to point out that this is something that Ms. Spidel had approached or discussed 3 years ago. So just to give you an idea of how far ahead she's looking in her day-to-day operations, day-to-day, she's looking at our organization. She's always looking for new opportunities, new ways we can do business. So in this case, it's just a matter of the timing works out for a bunch of different reasons. But I think in a budget session at least 3 years ago, she suggested doing something like this. So just want to point that out.
Thank you. Any other comments, either from the committee or the public?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, and I spent 9 years on the planning board, so I have a little experience in that area. Even in cases where a developer isn't purposely pitting one group against another or one department against another, they sometimes do it by accident, just because they don't know who to talk to. So they go to talk to one individual, they get the answers they need, they walk away, they do all the stuff that they're told, they come back and find out they haven't done all the stuff that somebody else needs. So there's a coordination effort that is really impossible to do unless you have the oversight. So having a land use czar of some kind, I think makes a heck of a lot of sense, and it will, I guarantee, will save us a lot of money and heartburn.
So I have more information when you're ready to move on.
Okay, let's move on then.
So the next thing that I wanted to go over is one of the one-page handouts. It says fiscal 2015 as recommended, and it's got revenue and expenditure on the top. So when this one? Okay.
I think I kept them all.
I don't have one.
I do, I have a lot.
So when the budget was originally presented back at the end of February, we had
Here, it went that way.
$90,709 left on the table, unallocated. I sent you out an email, I think it was yesterday, that there is a joint resolution on local aid, which was very exciting news that they had it, but a little disappointing at what was contained in it. So in the joint resolution, which the House passed yesterday and the Senate was supposed to pass today, I didn't see anything posted that they had, but I believe they did. There's no additional Chapter 70 education aid for the town of Lunenburg over and above what the governor included in his budget, and what the governor included is the number that I used. So that was the disappointing part, because we had expected to see the legislature do better than the governor in Chapter 70, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. In the unrestricted general government aid category, the lottery aid, there's $25,391 additional over and above what the governor included and over and above what I included in here. So the amount of budget unallocated at this point is $116,100. And we have 117,000 uses for that money. But I'm just going to go through 6. And the street sweeper is not on here. I don't know how I forgot to put that on there. So that would be 7. So the first is the Lane property, the purchase of the Lane property, or a portion of the Lane property. And I will give you a little bit of information, and the Open Space Committee will come in and talk to you about that under the other moneyed articles. But the town has the opportunity to purchase about 175 acres of the Lane property, which is on Holman Street. And it's a very significant piece of property from a conservation perspective to add to the town's open space. And there are a lot of people who can speak a lot more eloquently on that than us. We have the opportunity to get a significant grant to help us with the purchase. There's a grant program that would provide up to $400,000 to purchase this property. We are estimating the purchase price and the other legal work that needs to be done to purchase, at $650,000. So assuming the town received the full $400,000 grant, we would have a local match of $250,000. My estimate is based on $230,000, so it's a little bit off. But if we were to acquire that property either to borrow for over 5 years, because I would not suggest paying cash for it, because the only way we could pay that would be to take money out of the stabilization fund, and I couldn't recommend doing that because we're just at that 5% level, and it's critical that we maintain that 5% level as we go through the construction of the school project. So we would need to borrow for that. If we borrowed over a period of 5 years, the estimate is $50,625, or over 10 years, $27,025. So that's one article that will be competing for that $116,000. The second is the pavement management. And what I've done is I've just pulled out the things that are listed as over target in the budget. And I haven't pulled out everything. I've pulled out just the major ones. So we're looking for $800,000 or up to $800,000 for the pavement management plan. The third would be Lunenburg Public Schools. The gap between my recommendation and the superintendent's recommendation is $450,250. If you're wondering the order, it has nothing to do with priority. I just pulled them out as they appear in the budget in that order. The Lunenburg Police Department, you heard the chief tonight, requests 3 officers, $199,000. plus about $42,000 in benefits that would not be in the police department budget. You heard the fire chief request funding for 2 firefighters, EMTs to provide 24/7 coverage at the station. That would be $210,000. Well, see, I lied. The land use director should have been higher, but since it was me presenting, I put it down at the bottom. So I would propose it's always good to go last, right? $12,500. That would bring that salary up to $85,000, which I think is more realistic for the type of person that we would want to attract. And that is very much in line with what we pay our police chief, our fire chief, and our DPW director, which are the department heads, department managers of our larger departments in town. And then the street sweeper, which I did not include on here, and I do have a little bit of information. So if we were to finance the street sweeper over a period of 5 years, that cost would be about $40,000. Because of the life of that piece of equipment, you certainly could finance it over 10 years, and obviously that'd be half, or about $20,000. The DPW director did give me some data today on outsourcing, which I'd like to distribute to you just so you have. He was not able to be here this evening because of a family illness, but this is pretty self-explanatory. Do you want to just... So DPW did do an informal solicitation for cost to outsource street sweeping. Contacted 4 different vendors. The hourly rates are between $100 and $120. So because 3 out of 4 are, they're pretty close. So I think those rates are good, even though this is an informal bid. He's estimated what the work would be, 1 pass on all of the roadways, sweeping the parking lots, having some time set aside for emergencies or paving. When we have a car accident, a lot of times we need to send the sweeper out. And so the estimate on an annual basis is $27,600 for this activity if we were to outsource it. Obviously, there are some variables, not all of the, because of the condition of the roads, it might take a little bit longer on some roads to sweep. And I think one of the concerns is the potential availability for emergencies. The current sweeper that we have in fiscal 13, we put $11,000 into maintaining that. We have some additional repairs that are needed if this is to stay in operation in fiscal 15, which would be about $6,000, and there is a quote from a vendor to do that work. So you can see if we're talking about, this piece of equipment has a 20-plus year lifespan. You could easily finance it over any period of time, 5-10 years, and it certainly would make sense to do that. And again, 5 years to finance it, it would be $40,000. 10, it would be $20,000. We're going to spend, about $27,600 estimated annually to do the work.
Ask a question?
Yeah.
The price per hour includes labor? A
Yes,
driver?
the equipment and
What happens with, it's obviously time consuming, whether or not we outsource or whether we do it ourselves. What happens to the, I'm assuming gentleman, that would normally do this? Are we now looking at somebody that's not going to have employment for 6 weeks?
Not at all. It's a great question, but we don't have, in a lot of communities, you'll see somebody is just hired as a street sweeper. We don't have that here. All of our personnel in DPW, they're all qualified to do the same level of work. And though we do have somebody dedicated to doing this, we have plenty of other activities that person can do in the springtime when we would be doing this. So we wouldn't be talking about eliminating or reducing any of our in-house staff as a result of outsourcing if we chose to do that.
We could expect, though, that we'd have more benefit coming from that person because they have other time to do other things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is this quote solely for the sweeper and the operator and not the truck, that we send a truck and a person with the sweeper to take the dirt and get rid of it?
Right, so this is, we would still have to dedicate one of our personnel to follow with the truck to catch for the sweepings. They're called something else, but you know what I mean when I say sweepings. Okay.
Well, my own sense is that one way or the other, since there's nothing in the budget to accommodate, and again, I don't know how old the current sweeper is, so I don't know. I'm sorry?
Very old.
It's very
Yes, very
ancient?
old.
Okay. We either budget for looking at the purchase of one over time, or I think there needs to be some accommodation in the budget for the potential for outsourcing. And again, the discussion seems to go to the 27,000 is for one pass. I'm assuming that there would be more than one pass required, but I don't know much about street sweeping, and I don't know whether the status of the street sweeper that we have would be to either back that up to work as a backup sweeper or to work on those other emergencies that might come up as a secondary unit. But either way, it looks like there's going to have to be some money spent for the street sweeper.
Yeah.
Or
So
the function.
the current street sweeper, it's my understanding that the repairs that are needed they're needed to operate the vehicle. So it wouldn't be available as a backup without these repairs.
So item 7, then, you're recommending adding another item to this? And what's your recommendation? Is your recommendation to buy a sweeper, or to at least look at it as one of the potential options of the things that we're going to need to look at? within that $116,000 threshold?
It's definitely something that needs to be added into the mix. It has to, we have to decide what we're going to do on an ongoing, long-term basis, either in 15, or if we don't decide in 15, 16. So if, I think for fiscal 15, either if people aren't comfortable that they have enough data on the need to purchase the street sweeper, and I understand if you're not personally, I think it's something that we should do in-house because I think we need the flexibility of having the equipment. I think the service level expectation people have is going to be higher than what we're going to get out of a contracted service. I think the Department of Public Works in particular has a pretty good track record of identifying projects to outsource that make sense. And I think the best example I can give you is the landscaping and mowing. We used to do all of that in-house, and we outsourced that. We used to do all of the cleaning of buildings in-house, and we were able to outsource that at a better cost. But I think at a minimum, we either need to include something for the maintenance that needs to be done, and potentially that maintenance, I mean, maybe there's a way to fit that in the fiscal 14 budget. And I would hope that we could do that because we're going to need that piece of equipment in 14. If we don't have the money till 15, we're past the season for doing this. But we have to come to a resolution on it either this year or next year at the very latest.
I'm sorry, Carrie, I didn't quite understand that last bit. Are you suggesting that we would either outsource or purchase in fiscal 14?
No, I'm hoping that we would be able to pay for the repair.
Or pay for the repair, the
in fiscal
$6,000
14.
repair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other question I would have would just be would we then look at, if we were looking at financing the purchase of a street sweeper, reducing the amount that we would look at financing the Lane property acquisition in order to stay within the numbers that we just identified, because there's no excess capacity identified in 2015 for, do you know what I mean?
I think so. But if
on the chart you gave us,
Yeah.
there's no excess capacity in 2015, so we either look at increasing that number, the bottom line that we're looking at.
Well, there's no excess capacity, but that doesn't take into account this 116,000 that's on the table.
Okay.
So I guess that is the excess capacity. It's not shown there because it's a different source of funds, I guess is the best, different category of funds. Does that?
It's fine. I'm just, I'm just looking at that bottom line. I guess in my head, I'm also just thinking what this means in terms of, looking at capital and looking at debt and looking at the policies as we've been drafting them, how we want that really to play out, and whether we would be making decisions based on and if we're making decisions based on the 3%, it would fall within that anyway, but I was just curious if that was something that you were trying to fit the figure into the 1.2 million, or you were trying to, it had nothing to do with that because you have this extra pile of money.
Right, the latter, because
Okay.
I can't fit it into that 1.2.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have the perspective that the Capital Planning Committee has, because I was not involved in those discussions. I know there are many items on that 5-year capital plan. From what I understand, though, the street sweeper is kind of a unique thing. All cities and towns are sweeping their streets at the same time. And I don't know what that means in terms of the impact that has on the potential cost of the outsourcing. But it seems to me that just because of the nature of it and everyone's doing it at the same time, it's probably a service that can be done more efficiently in-house on the surface.
And I think the other thing for me as I'm going through this is I'm looking at if I was going to be supporting a recommendation or making a recommendation in any way, I'm not having heard anything about the Lane property. Well, I have heard about the Lane property acquisition because I think from watching the selectmen's meeting, and the land use director and the sweeper, then we're pretty much through the money.
If that,
Plus some. I mean, if you buy a $180,000 street sweeper, finance it over 10 years with interest, you're talking of, $25,000, $30,000 easily a year for 10 years. So it's not only the 116 that exists this year, but that's money that's going to, once again, it's a business decision. If the town feels it's the right thing to do, then it should do it. But that's money that we're going to be paying off, taking away from the capacity, in essence, for the next 10 years. So, and if every year, once again, that capacity, I worry about that capacity, that perception of that capacity, because if every year we find one or two things, like a street sweeper, that it's easy to just finance over 10 years, that capacity is going to get eaten away year after year after year. It's not going to drop like your model shows today. That's assuming little to no additional financing throughout that time period. So I just think everybody has to go into each one of these with their eyes wide open as to what the impact is of doing it. And once again, if it's more cost effective for the town to do it in-house, then we should do it in-house. Over 2 one-year periods with the capital planning committee, we never saw a document even close to this. I still question whether a bid process would affect those prices. If we were to go to 3 people that rented these things and said, we'd like to do a 3-year agreement for 6 weeks or whatever of this function, what would your cost be to us? I don't think that's been done. So that could take it down some. Once again, you get to fine points on what the overall costs are. We just wanted to know one versus the other in a scientific method. And we're closer here. I don't think we're there where we should be, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I think all we can do is go through an informal bid process at this point in time. We don't have a project to bid. And I don't know if word gets out on the street that we're going through a formal bid process, but we haven't made a decision, I don't know that that's going to impact the prices. But I completely understand what you're saying. We put an estimate together for painting the library. $40,000 based on the informal bid process, and the bids came in at 22. And that's, a function of when we went out, when we asked the first time and when we asked the second time. So it certainly happens. But this is, I think, pretty close to the best data that we have available right now.
Our thought on the capital planning committee was that if we could go one more year with the current machine, do the repairs that are needed, and fund those if need be, just do that for one more year, get every duck in a row, and then make a decision one way or the other next year, whether to purchase it, if it's one of those high-ticket items that can be done within the 500,000+ framework, or finance it next year. But go through this one more year, they put 11,000 into it last year, and they got it in pretty decent shape. They were able to do the job. If they could do that again for this one more year, and then have it fall into the capital planning process next year with the necessary data before us, then I think we could make a decision, and we could clearly get it done then.
Mr. Matthews.
If I could, because I'm an old capital planning geek, I used to be on the committee. The importance of capital planning is that, of course, as we've seen tonight, there's a lot more needs than there is resources. So that makes it incumbent on the department heads to really look at their departments, look at their equipment, plan ahead, knowing their equipment's going to go, and work out a scheduling so we can prioritize the money, because there's never enough. And if we don't, we don't want to wait till a piece of equipment's falling apart in the mechanics bay and say, oh, we need a new one. We want to be planning. That's the whole point. The problem I've got so far with this process, and I share with Steve, is that there has not been a fully formed financial program put together in front of this. And the problem with, capital planning was put in place years ago because these things can become political circuses. And if you're a department head and you don't plan, if you don't put the effort in up front, you don't work the project, the program like everybody else, and you can get a couple of, important people behind you, selectmen, a couple FinCom members of the public, get whipped up into emotional frenzy that, we've got to do this. We start buying things out of turn, and we start making snap decisions based on, the emotion of the moment or whatever the heat of the moment is. We're trying to get away from that with capital planning. So I'm a little concerned that we're moving in the wrong direction, and we're getting away from that. We've talked about the cost of buying a new piece of equipment. We haven't talked about the cost to operate it. We haven't talked about the cost for labor, fuel, insurance, maintenance, all those things, carrying costs. That forms the full cost of operation. An outsourced number, that includes all of that. So you got to compare the two. When I look at this, when I hear all the numbers thrown around, I think ultimately, it makes sense to me. I think ultimately we're going to want to buy one. I think. But it's kind of ambiguous. And that's really no way to decide if you're going to spend $184,000 or more. I think it makes a lot of sense to spend $6,000 or $10,000 to get the piece we got fixed, make it usable, get another year out of it, because of course no one's talking about not doing it. As Steve pointed out, a lot of concern was given to the environment and impacts if we don't sweep. No one's saying we're not going to sweep. We're making a decision. Do we spend $10,000, get through another year, or do we spend $184,000? So I think we got to look at the whole deal. I think Jack presented to you, he's got a program now, he tracks what everyone does, how many hours a day they're spent working on something. End of the year, we can get a report on how many hours the sweepers run. We can put a labor cost to it. We can put interest costs, insurance costs, fuel costs, all that. We can build a real model of what this costs. And there's no reason we can't do that. And I think we have to do that for a piece this big. And we have an alternative. Fix it, run it, get it through the year. And if it breaks down, maybe we could outsource some. Maybe you carry something in reserve in case we do. But I think this is something we really need to stick to, a really good capital planning process, in my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you.
I did want to speak tonight. I wasn't going to speak to the sweeper, but now I am. I understand the frustration. I understand the frustration with the lateness of the data. I understand, having gone through all of the capital planning forms, I absolutely understand that. But the reality is the reason for these meetings, the reason for these public hearings, the reason for this length of discussion is to go through and rehash all of this. And the fact of the matter is we now have the data in front of us. As for the bid process, as the town manager said, we can only do an informal bid process because you can't go out to bid if you don't have a funding mechanism. So while we can, can we get some more fine-tuned data? Yes, we probably can. Does it make sense to perhaps wait until next year? Yes, it might at this point. But the reason for all of these discussions is so that these kind of issues can be brought forward. I absolutely understand. I wish that it had been brought forward sooner. I know that the DPW director had the data. Why he didn't share it, I can't tell you that. And I only know that he had the data because I talked to him about this specifically, while talking about roadways as the MPO rep. But the purpose of these hearings and the purpose of having the department heads come in is so that we can cull through all of that and we can get to the final answers. And I think we're getting there. And actually, as far as the cost of operating the piece of equipment, the reality is we do that now. We operate this piece of equipment, so I don't see an escalation in that cost. In fact, I would probably see that it's going to go down because you're not going to be taking the machine back for additional repairs, and it's going to work better than a 20-plus piece of, I want to say 25-year-old piece of equipment. So you know, that's the whole point of this. Is there frustration it wasn't shared sooner? Absolutely. But the reality is, it is something we have to look at. And I want to really emphasize that $27,000 number is for one pass. As noted on this paper that was distributed by the DPW director, some roads, because of the length of salt, the amount of salt, are going to require 2 to 4 passes. So when we talk about $27,000, keep in mind, it's not $27,000. That's for one pass, and it's very unlikely that one pass is going to be sufficient. So when we look at outsourcing, and it doesn't take into account emergencies, it doesn't take into account paving projects. If we're going to do a paving project, which I hope we are able to do when we talk about the pavement management plan and the need to fund that, you need the street sweeper to do that project effectively. The other thing I did want to bring up is the Lane property, and I understand that hasn't been extensive discussion about the Lane property, and I know that there will be more discussion, you know, with the Lane Acquisition Group, which I'm a member of, and I just wanted to really highlight that this is a one-time opportunity. This wasn't something we forecasted. This is an opportunity that's come forward. This is a 174-acre piece of land that abuts the town forest. If we don't move forward on this project this year, we will lose the opportunity. We won't be able to get another bite at the apple. So if we choose not to move forward with this purchase, we will lose that opportunity. We will lose the only potential access we could have for meaningful access to the town forest. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. You know, the grant opportunity, we have a dedicated group of people that will work on that grant, and we are confident that we will get that $400,000 grant. Grant funding is now open until middle of June. And, you know, I think it's important that while I understand the funds are tight and we're all trying to vie for money and we're trying to spend the money the best that we can, it's important to understand that once we miss this opportunity, we will never get it back.
I do just want to just go back to, in the discussion about the street sweeper, to my original comment, and I still think it would probably be worth taking a look at, but there would still need to be money in the budget for going ahead and planning to outsource for the next year. And I'm going to assume that if the street sweeper is repaired enough to be able to be functional for 2014, it should be able to be available for some of for not the extent of street sweeping that's required at this time of year once the snow melts. But I just wanted to go back to, I still think it's an option that can be considered.
Should the repairs be done that we're talking about, they would basically be able to continue to do street sweeping in the same manner that they've been doing street sweeping, which would cover the streets, the parking lots, the emergencies. It would cover all of it.
For 2014,
For the upcoming year.
which is 2014.
Well, it's the fiscal, it would be actually, what, fiscal 2015? Fiscal 2015. So that would be July 1st, this coming July 1st.
No, we're talking about the spring season coming up.
Well, it's this spring, right, but it would go...
$6,000 of repairs to make it operational for this spring.
This year.
Okay,
this calendar year.
right.
Okay. Jamie?
Mr. Toll.
Mr. Chair, not in an attempt to belabor the point, I do agree with Mrs. Bertram that these hearings and these meetings and the public hearing that will result are an important part of the process. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the Capital Planning Committee, which has 6 dedicated citizens sitting on it, meeting once a week for 6 months, is also a very important part of the process, and that our recommendations are a priority setting for the town manager to then make some determinations and for the Finance Committee to help us decide what's affordable. Okay? I don't believe we're now throwing around numbers like 27 that I still don't think were based on any data that I could feel comfortable saying, yeah, that's the correct data. Another, just a point of interest, one of the bullets on the so-called data says that we couldn't get a contract that doesn't have a not to exceed figure. We all just watched what they did in the tunnel. If you put a contract in place and you put the right incentives in place, and there's a competitive environment, you can get a data-driven contract that meets its objectives. Now, I don't know if those objectives are better than doing it ourselves and purchasing the vehicle. I haven't seen any data to prove it to me either way.
Thank you. The last thing I'm interested in is disrupting the capital planning process. I would just point out that this is number 18 on a list of 23. And it is, in fact, the first item that hasn't been funded. It's the highest ranked item that hasn't been funded. So let's keep that in perspective, too.
Just wanted to just clarify a couple things. As we're talking about in-source versus outsource, and just to clarify, I'm not looking to belabor the point either or argue with my esteemed colleague, Mrs. Bertram, but we have not seen the data. We have not seen the numbers. We haven't seen all the full formulas. We've seen an estimate based on an estimate of hours. We haven't seen the actual hours we operate our sweeper. We haven't seen the labor costs that go with it. We haven't seen the fuel costs that go with that. And all those things are in your outsourced number. So we don't know what we're comparing that $27,000 to, or if it's even a valid number. So again, we need the full formula to get it all through. I think let's spend 6-10 grand, let's get it fixed. Let's use the one we got, and let's put the work into getting the right, that we hold everyone accountable for in the capital plan and make the right decision next spring. My recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
The only other thing I'll add, we've beaten this dead horse the same way we beat this dead horse in capital planning 2 years in a row. So I know it's a difficult decision to make. It's not an easy one. I just think with a little bit more data, it will be an easy one. And, you know, we talk about $185,000 for the cost of the sweeper, but that's only one component of the cost. There's a whole series of costs beyond that that just haven't even been factored into this yet, and we need to see that.
Mr. Alonso.
I felt lonely being the only selectman who didn't make a comment. But I actually have a question. I'm listening to all this, and certainly I want to make the first point of the fact that in evaluating this, as I'm hearing any late-breaking data, that I'm not looking, in my own view, in my own analysis, to supersede the capital planning committee for anything except potentially a need that was not well described or well presented to the committee at the time, or not having the proper data. So I acknowledge the fact that it would be good if everybody had equal skills in presenting their cases. But that being said, sometimes things can certainly go unwell presented, if that's a term. But my question is the following: if we don't approve it this year, what is the lead time of getting a street sweeper? Because we're not talking about getting a street sweeper that has to last. If we're not talking about approving it or potentially approving it till next year's town meeting, that means this street sweeper now has to last kind of 2 years, not 1 year. And from what I heard, and you heard as well from the DPW director, is that the $6,000 is what it needs absolutely right now. And as anybody knows with a vehicle of that age and that kind of duty that it has, it could potentially, there's no reason to know when it's going to die for good, but it could. So that's my question, is that when would be the earliest, if we approved it next year, if we delayed it for another year, when would be the earliest that we could get the street sweeper? Because money wouldn't be approved until, first week in May of 2015. I'm assuming you don't go and buy a street sweeper off the lot. You probably have to order it, and it probably takes, 6 months maybe, I don't know.
Paula, do you know when street sweeping starts in town? How early? Late?
I'm certainly not an expert on street sweeping. I think it's all weather dependent. It's usually as early in the spring as they can.
So could we be looking at $6,000 to $10,000 this year? And then and then we're going to be faced with this again, because we're not going to get a street sweeper in time to do this season. So we're stuck with $6,000 to $10,000 regardless to fix it in time to sweep this year. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
So then just putting it off, that could just add another $6,000 to $10,000 or plus on a piece of equipment that's, there's no arguing that the piece of equipment is only valued at, what was it, $7,000 to $8,000? So I feel like we're gonna just keep putting money into something. And And I get everybody's point. I truly understand everybody's point. I could find a way to side with every single one of you. But I sit here and say, to put $6,000 to $10,000 into something to buy us another year, we're really not buying us another year, because we're going to be looking at, most likely, based on our track record, more repairs a year from now.
Well, I think what we're really talking about is, do we put in money into the fiscal 15 budget to outsource, or do we put money in fiscal 15 to buy? And I think the arguments are pretty compelling that we don't have enough data to make that decision tonight. I'm sorry?
I would say if the trade-off is, do we spend 9, 10 grand to repair it versus if we go out and buy one for 184 grand, 190 grand for a 20-year life, amortize that, you spend 9, 10 grand a year to own. So it's a wash, ultimately. And they are in the lot. You can get them pretty quick. It's in the budget. You know, yeah, we're going to have to get 2 seasons out of it. But that's why we do capital planning, so we're not in this position. And if we do capital planning properly, we're not in this position. And it's really inherently bad management to politicize and jump into midstream dealing with issues that should have been planned. And they should have been, you know, whether or not someone's good at presenting facts and data, if you've been in front of capital planning for 10, 15, 20 years, you should know the process. And actually, I had a good conversation with the DPW director Monday about it, and he agreed. You know, it's all about data and facts and figures. It's a business decision. So, you know, put 9, 10 in. It's like going it for 9 or 10. Should I leave?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Please. Kerry,
Move the question.
Quickly.
please.
I just want to point out that I kind of get a little, I don't know what the proper word would be. It's a little troubling, the term that we're politicizing it. I'm not looking at this, I certainly don't look at this from the people who are on either side as politicizing it. I think that it's important to say that could the item have been presented, having not sat on the capital planning, and I think you said, Mr. Chair, that you didn't either, but from not sitting on it, could it have been presented better to convince people? Yeah, probably. Could it have been better in data backing it up? I think clearly we all would agree that. But the street sweeper is not to appease the DPW director. The street sweeper is to perform a service for the residents of the town. So I'm not willing, even if I acknowledge, and I'm not, but even if I acknowledge that it could be that it was the lacking of one person doing the presenting the capital planning as to why it missed the cut of the funding, I'm still interested in hearing what is in the best interest of the town for the purchase or the repair or an outsourcing for a year. I think that's in the mix. It's not, I'm not here to compare people's presenting styles or their ability or inability to do that. I just wish we would focus on what the service is, and that's really what we should use in determining which one of those avenues, repair, outsourcing, or purchase, that we buy. Thanks.
And I can assure you that from the capital planning standpoint, we were looking at it purely from a financial and a factual basis.
No,
There was not 1 ounce of negative feelings towards it or positive feelings towards it. We were looking to make a decision that was in the best financial interest of the
I
town.
have no doubts, and I've heard from many people on the capital planning committee that all feel exactly the same way. So I don't think there was any contention about the data that you were given and how you got to that point.
Right. We just never felt like the whole, you know, we talk about this $10,000 cost, which it may or may not be. Last year was pretty significant repairs at 11 grand. Probably will be half that this year, probably. But we then assume that there's no repairs on a new one. Every new one's going to have maintenance costs. There's going to be other costs. That's why I get frustrated with the 185 number. The 185 number is just the start. There's going to be 5 or 6 other line items right behind it that are also going to be added to that amount. So if we're going to fairly compare outsourcing in a bid environment to the actual purchase and maintenance and insurance and labor and all the other functions, we should just see those numbers side by side. Then we can go to the the townspeople and say, we recommend this, and this is why. This is the analysis we did, and this is why it's in the best interest of the taxpayers of Lunenburg.
Okay, I'd like to bring this to a close, unless there's a new point to be made.
I just have to make this point, and that is when we talk about additional costs and we talk about insurance and we talk about we don't have those discussions when we talk about the fire truck. We don't have those discussions because they are things that we know that we are currently incurring as owning that piece of equipment. So while I completely appreciate that this information has come late into the mix, and I completely appreciate that the capital plan didn't have the data that they needed, as far as politicizing or it's bad management or special interest or whatever, it's not. This information has now come to the forefront. And we have to deal with it, whether we deal with it in, try to squeak by for 2 more years, and we keep going back to this bid process. We can do an informal bid process, which, if you want specific quotes from someone or something, if you want additional data, I think we can do that. And we can't do a bid on a piece of equipment that we have no intention of buying. It's just not. We can get informal bids, and we can get more precise informal bids, but to bring up additional costs, fuel, and the fire truck takes fuel, and the all of the equipment that we buy has costs associated with it. So we have to.
Because we're not outsourcing.
I didn't cut you off.
We're not outsourcing the fire truck.
Okay, but we're not talking about outsourcing the street sweeper.
Yes, we are. We're comparing costs of outsourcing or insourcing.
Okay.
That's the whole discussion.
But
that's the point. So if we're not going to outsource the fire truck we own, we operate, all that. We're talking about potentially outsourcing the street sweeper. So if you outsource the street sweeper for $100, $120 an hour, that includes fuel, the operator, insurance, carrying costs, and equipment.
Insurance, maintenance.
So I just want to make that point. We're talking about a financial decision between outsource and insource, potentially.
Okay, and I agree that more data is needed. But my understanding from Jack's presentation last week is that it was $120 an hour for personnel to Right. And then there was an additional cost if there was a lesser cost if we used our piece of equipment. So is there more data? Yes, but in looking at the data that we have, there is minimal cost associated with it. It is lesser cost to own our piece of equipment. Is there more data needed? Yes, but the reality is we need to find that data now. Does it make sense this year to look at squeaking another year out? Absolutely. But do we try to do that for 2 years? Because Mr. Alonso's right. We're looking 3 years out before, we're going to be looking at 3 seasons before we're able to, because we're going to be in, we're in the season now. So then we're going to be looking at the season next year, and then we're going to finally move forward the following year. So that's my problem, is, we've spent $11,000 last year, we're gonna spend $6,000 this year, and at least, and then we're gonna be doing potentially the same thing next year.
So I'm going to bring this section of the debate to close. Sorry for letting it out of my control here. We have a number of items before us here. This is just one of 7, and there's no guarantee that we'll be limited to these 7 when the debate is broadened. So I think we've heard the relative merits on both sides of this particular issue. We haven't yet heard from the Lane property proposal. We haven't yet heard from Lunenburg Public Schools, so we're still in the data gathering phase here. So we're not going to make a decision on this tonight or a recommendation on this tonight. Kerry, do you have anything else?
I just wanted to, nothing on the 15 budget. I wanted to give you an update on the snow and ice for this year.
I think we do have that.
You already handed that out?
Have this, Karen.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
Unless it's a different one.
You can just leave it up
Did
there.
it change in the past
It
3
did.
hours?
It didn't change. Okay. So our appropriation for fiscal 14 for snow and ice is $250,500, and our year-to-date expenditures are $461,399. So we have a deficit of about $211,000. I believe that we can cover a significant portion of that within the existing fiscal 14 appropriation with the reserve fund, if that ends up being available, and we typically convert that to snow and ice at the end of the year anyway, but also through some savings in health insurance as a result of the premium renewal that we received January 1st for our retiree plans. I don't believe that we can cover all of it within the fiscal 14 existing appropriation, and I have put an article on the warrant for a fiscal 14 budget adjustment, a supplemental appropriation, and I'd be looking to pull some money from free cash to cover this. It's still a little early within the current budget to nail anything down, but I think $50,000+ from free cash is what I would be looking for, depending on how we do in some other departments. We are running a deficit in our veterans benefits, which we have talked about before as well. So just a heads up that there will need to be a supplemental appropriation. And I gave you a separate sheet that was the free cash certification. So presently we have $235,000 in free cash. I've proposed that we use about $75,000 of that in fiscal 15 to bring our stabilization fund up to 5% in 15. And that would leave about $161,000 available free cash. And I think we need to plan on not having that to use in fiscal 15. That at this point we need to plan on that being needed to cover the fiscal 14 budget through snow and ice and whatever else pops up between now and the end of the fiscal year. Any questions on that? And then the only other thing I gave you this evening is a list of the articles that have been submitted to date. And there are a couple I threw on there that I know are coming in, or I expect are coming in. The warrant is open until Monday, March 24th at 4 p.m. So right now we have 29 articles, and maybe a couple of others.
So we'll be hearing more about these other moneyed articles on our meeting of March 27.
Yes.
And we're also scheduled for a public hearing on the evening of the 27th.
Yes.
I've asked the town manager to prepare just a very brief summary of the budget. In years past, we've had her go back through virtually the entire presentation in summary fashion. I've asked her to prepare a very brief summary of revenues on one slide and expenditures on a second slide. Anyone that, hopefully anyone that has the right interest in the budget has been tuning in or here in person, and we'll be prepared to bring any questions to that hearing on the 27th.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Okay. Do you have any other reports? Okay. We do have minutes. From our meeting of 3/6.
Since Brian and Steve weren't here, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Do we have any committee updates?
None for me.
Nope.
The reuse committee, I was unable to attend as I was away, but the reuse committee has met again and are back in business to varying degrees. So I'll have much more to offer after the next time we meet.
Okay. Karen?
I have nothing. Council on Aging did meet, but we heard their report last week. And the other two I was not present at.
And we had a school building committee meeting last evening. We got caught up in all of our meetings. The town clerk requested that we post minutes from the public forum meetings that we had. So we got caught up on all of that. We've had several working sessions on the design, and TAPE presented an update on the design development and some conceptual drawings of the inside of the building, which was pretty interesting. The design development update is due to be presented to the MSBA on April 15th. So that's our next milestone date. Okay. I'm going to dispense with the discussion on fiscal policies. Is that all right? And any other business for this evening?
None. I have none.
Okay. We're scheduled to meet next week, March 20. We have Lunenburg Public Schools and Monty Tech. I'm going to be away on business, so
I'll introduce everyone.
be here, Brian? Okay. And then on March 27th, we'll be wrapping up our budget meetings. We have the sewer enterprise, all the other moneyed articles, and then the public hearing, the official public hearing on the budget. Okay. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second?
Any discussion? Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks very much.
Totally coming